Chapter 27. Kesen was a little regretful. He still liked listening to music, but now he had no choice but to leave the office and start night walks like a student. But it's a pity that Filch didn't catch the professor when he caught Yayo, so he lost the fun of fighting Filch in a battle of wits and courage. Along the way, Kaizen thought about using a torch, but when he thought about other wizards using that kind of pure light source, it seemed to be called fluorescent flashing. After taking a look at the pixel torch he was using to burn the flame, it looked a bit lacking in quality. After thinking for a while, he directly summoned a piece of fluorite flying around him. This looks much more classy. Kesen came all the way to the library. Although it was less popular than during the day, it was still great without Mrs. Pants's hawk-like gaze. Fluorite surrounded him, and he walked all the way towards the restricted book area. After all, he was admitted to the University of Manchester on his own strength, and his learning ability was definitely not bad. During this time, ordinary alchemy books could no longer satisfy him. Of course, there are also cases where he is so idle that he cannot learn any other magic except alchemy. Even alchemy complements his abilities. To be honest, if he hadn't been able to use cubes to replicate most of the magic taught at Hogwarts, he would have been unable to pretend. But that's not necessarily the case. Maybe in the future, if you gain favorability to a certain extent, you can directly open a mod for yourself, or even a command block, then, Jia. Who is there? An old and hoarse voice came from a distance, and it seemed a little trembling if you listened carefully. It's me, Kesen Heath, Professor of Alchemy. Are you Mr. Filch? Kesen waved his hand, letting the fluorite cube fly to his chest, illuminating his face. It's Professor Heath. Please don't laugh so scary again in the future, Filch said dryly. I'll pay attention. Did it disturb your work? Kesen said politely. It's okay. Filch held a lantern that was not very bright, walked around rows of bookshelves, and finally appeared in front of Kesen. I'm just here to confirm that you are really a professor. Some naughty little wizards will pretend to be professors to deceive me. Once I confirm that you are genuine, there will be no problem. It's hard work. Kesen nodded, then noticed Filch's dim lantern, rubbed his fingers, and an exquisite iron lantern appeared in his hand. This is the first time we have met in private. Maybe this can be used as a meeting gift. This is an alchemy creation. It will keep shining like this without putting in fuel. Oh, you gave it to me? Aren't you just making fun of me? Filch asked in disbelief as he looked at the brand new lantern that was so close at hand. And it was also a precious alchemy creation. Road. Someone is making fun of you? Kaizen frowned. There are simply not too many. Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Slytherin. Those naughty little wizards have always been like this. A delicious-looking candy can make your lips swollen for a week, and a shiny small things can release too much electricity, Filch said casually, pretending to be indifferent. You should talk to their respective deans, and I have no intention of having fun with you, Kesen said, and handed the lantern to Filch. Oh, thank you, Professor. Favorability plus 10 from Filch. Favorability plus 10 from Filch. Favorability plus 10 from Filch. Trust from Filch plus 10. Trust from Filch plus 10. Trust from Filch plus 10. Kesen looked at the series of positive emotions that appeared in front of him and didn't know what to say. The Filch in front of him may have enough food and clothing, but he is obviously not treated equally, so that a lantern burst out a series of positive emotions. What a poor man. Professor, are you here to catch students wandering at night? Filch asked. No, I came here to read a book. I can't sleep tonight. Kesen shook his head. Then I won't bother you. I haven't seen you before. You must be a very good wizard. If you want to know about some strange rooms or secret passages in this castle, please feel free to ask me. I will. Thanks. Well, Filch left the library with his brand new lantern. Kesen looked at his back and felt that his walking posture looked younger. Mr. Filch, you should probably buy a looking glass. That thing can allow you to avoid the mischief of naughty little wizards, and it will not make you miss out on the kindness of other little wizards. Kesen thought for a moment and then reminded him loudly. I know how to do it, Professor. I read a book called Forbidden Alchemy in the restricted section of the library for a while. Strictly speaking, the level of alchemy is not too high, but the things in it are quite evil. Among them, the most evil one is flesh and blood alchemy, such as fusing flesh and blood into alchemy creations. In the distant 40,000 years later, this thing should be called wetware. But this was just a momentary brainstorm by Kesen. What really attracted him was another paragraph. Alchemy creations can be fused into flesh and blood, allowing him to gain the ability of alchemy creations. This is really needed for him, and the amount of work is not large. Now his other blocks, such as the exploding TNT, can hardly be seen as TNT. All he can see is a shining block. When encountering an enemy, he can directly control it to fly out, or wither the skull, and directly control it to fly out. In his mind, these two types of blocks are comparable to black magic, and their attack methods are no different from general black magic. They are easy to use to attack enemies. There is no difference between the use of other blocks and magic spells. There is only one thing that he really needs to merge into his flesh and blood, and that is the Ender Pearl. The thing must be thrown out and broken to be able to teleport itself, and the process of breaking it can be easily interrupted. Even if it is interrupted by obstacles, it is good if it is accidentally interrupted by the death curse. Isn't that just a flash of light to move the grave? So if the book in front of you allows you to fuse the Ender Pearl, like an Enderman, you can teleport anywhere at will. This is almost the apparition taught at Hogwarts, and not only does it not have the danger of separation, it is also not restricted by the anti-apparition curse. This is the best thing. Chapter 26. What's going on down there? Kaizen asked curiously. The midnight duel between Slytherin and Gryffindor is nothing to watch, Snape said coldly. Only then did Kaizen look towards the source of the noise, but unfortunately it was far away, and he couldn't hear what was said clearly. And both sides can be considered acquaintances. Harry, Neville, Ron and Hermione, the four little Gryffindor wizards. When Harry and Neville were chatting before, Kaizen thought that their relationship with Hermione was not all that good. It seemed that after that day when Hermione helped Neville and gave him advice in his office, only then did people's relationships get better. The Slytherin wizards on the other side were also acquaintances. The leader was Draco Malfoy, and he didn't recognize the other two. But speaking of it, Draco Malfoy's father, Lucius Malfoy, seemed to be full of upper-class restraint and alienation, but his son was full of arrogance and domineering. To be honest, if it weren't for their almost identical bones and hair, he would have doubted. Don't doubt it. It would be rude to doubt it anymore. Isn't there anyone to stop them? Kaizen asked Snape, who was standing aside. You can, but it's not necessary. Slytherin and Gryffindor have been fighting together for so many years. Don't worry about these little things. At most, they are a little nosy. Nosy? That squib. Mr. Filch? He's a squib? He is still a squib who refuses to accept his fate. Most of the salary Dumbledore has given him over the years has been given to batches of scammers who target rich squibs. Snape explained in a rare way. Understood. Kaizen nodded, and the farce at the dinner did not cause any waves. Just when he was about to return to his office after dinner, Snape suddenly spoke. By the way, you and I are going to go to that corridor later. I have already refined the innocuous potion you told me about last time, some water of life and death that can be effective through skin contact through the air grid, but I still need put him in that alchemy creation of yours. No problem now? Right now. The two left the auditorium and walked directly towards the corridor. It wasn't until the two of them walked outside the empty classroom that a record player suddenly appeared in Kaizen's hand, and in the other hand there was a stack of records, which he was picking through like playing cards. What are you doing? Hagrid said that as long as you listen to music for this three-headed dog, you can make him fall asleep. I'm choosing. That's not necessary. Snape shook his head, took out his wand and walked in directly. It's nothing more than a beast. All it takes is a feint. I need music. Stupid class. Stupid class. Music? The corner of Kaizen's mouth couldn't stop twitching, and he immediately didn't care about the record player and record in his hand. A piece of obsidian flew out of his hand, split into three in the air, and hit the three heads of the three-headed dog hard. Hiss! This beast is so quick to bite. Snape lifted up his trousers and looked at the bloody wound on his calf. You are too careless. Kaizen helped Snape express his apology that he was embarrassed to say out loud. Excuse me. Hold me a little bit. Of course. Kaizen stretched out his hand to hold Snape's shoulder, and the latter took out a bottle of bright red potion from his pocket and poured it directly on the wound on his calf. Are there any bandages or something? Well, I think it's about the same. This thing, but it's not sterilized. Kaizen took out a large piece of wool, balled it up, and pulled it apart. It doesn't matter. Snape took it and took out the potion and sprinkled it on it. Almost. Snape nodded, bent down and bandaged the wound, and the two of them passed the level until the last level. This once again confirms the gold content of Hagrid's level layout. The other professors, including Kaizen, were there to help Quirrell, Harry, and others break through. Only Hagrid wanted to kill the intruder. How about saying he is sincere? The two of them loaded the potion into the launcher. During the process, Kaysen picked up a bottle of potion and looked at it curiously. This magic potion? The real deal. Okay, although our potion may not be effective this time, it can be recycled then. Let's go. The two returned to the empty classroom with the three-headed dog on its forehead. Kaizen tentatively took out a feather and tested the big dog's breathing. Because I was not sure whether this big guy had 3 sets of lungs, I specially tried all 3 heads. I was relieved when I was sure they were all alive. After all, Hagrid loves magical animals so much. If this big guy dies, he will definitely be very sad. Is your injury okay? He looked at Snape again. The three-headed dog's teeth have black magic. The healing potion and white blood are useless. We can only wait for it to heal on its own. Do you need my help, such as a wheelchair or something? Don't worry, it's driven by absolute magic, so you don't need to push the wheels yourself. No need. Snape's mouth twitched. Okay, if necessary, just ask the students to come to me and use a sealed envelope. I will if I need to. Do you need me to help you back to the office? Need not. Snape left alone with a livid face, and the 2 favorability points from Snape in front of Kaysen ruthlessly betrayed his disguised persona. Isn't this just arrogance? Kaizen complained in confusion. I went back to the office and looked at the class schedule on my desk. There are no classes tomorrow. That's great. I can sleep a little later tonight, or even not sleep at all. This once again made him sigh at the comfort of the elective course professors at Hogwarts, compared with the compulsory course professors in 7 grades and 4 houses, who had full classes almost every day and had 8 classes every day. The professors of the elective courses were not at all comfortable. Since young wizards have the right not to choose this course, most, or even all grades, attend the 4 academies together, so there are only 4 classes a week. If Kaysen was more cruel to himself and took all 4 classes in one day, it would be almost all vacation, just 1 day and 6 days off. But he didn't do that. Firstly, he was indeed too tired. Secondly, it was extremely likely that he would attract the gaze of an indescribable being, then assign him a lot of tasks. It's Dumbledore. Kaysen thought for a while, and successfully made himself lose the pleasure of listening to records quietly in the office. Chapter 28. A book and pen suddenly appeared in his hand, and he copied out all the parts about flesh and blood alchemy in Forbidden Alchemy. Then he put Forbidden Alchemy back on the bookshelf, picked up his own manuscript, and headed back. Mansion. On the way back to the office from the library, Kaysen suddenly heard a series of footsteps, as if they were running away. He didn't say anything about this. There was nothing novel about Filch catching a little wizard wandering at night. It wasn't until he was nearly 20 meters away from the staircase that he realized that the classroom above that staircase seemed to be where Dumbledore used to fish. And that classroom also contained Hagrid's 3-headed dog. I'll give you Merlin. The Ender Pearl instantly appeared in Kaysen's hand, and in just 3 breaths, he appeared outside the classroom door. He quickly opened the door and saw 4 little wizards. At the same time, a bright light came from the distance, and a breathless voice came. Is it Professor Heath? Have you seen the 4 little wizards wandering at night? Kaizen looked down at the 4 little wizards squatting in front of him and shaking their heads wildly, as well as Filch, who was holding a lantern not far away, but still shook his head. That's it. I'll go look for them on other floors. Those naughty brats, they can't escape from my grasp. Filch said sadly and walked towards the stairwell. After Kaizen confirmed that Filch had left, he quickly pulled out all 4 little wizards in the room with one hand or two. Harry, Neville, Ron, Hermione, please tell me why you go out at night. No, compared to this, night outing is a complete trivial matter. Do you know that this big guy only needs 2 to eat the 3 of you? Around? Even the last one is divided into 3 parts. Kaysen scolded the 4 little ones sternly immediately after taking them back to the office. It's Malfoy. He asked us to come out for a duel, but he escaped and reported to Filch. We were also afraid of deducting points. Ron said a little aggrievedly. It's just a score. Let Filch deduct it. Did Dumbledore tell you about the danger of the empty classroom when school started? Did you turn a deaf ear to it? Is it better to deduct points or die? If not, the most he can do is confine you. Is death easier to accept than confinement? Kaysen stood up straight again and kept outputting with his hands on his hips. If it's Snape's confinement, it's really not as good as… Harry, shut up. You don't understand the seriousness of this matter now. The dangers of the 2 results you misjudged. Before you hid in that classroom, you should have thought of Dumbledore's warning to you at the beginning of the school year. Well, maybe you were in a panic and didn't react. That's okay. But when you saw that 3-headed dog, why didn't you escape immediately? Do you really think that Big Dog is sleeping peacefully? Even if I didn't say it, you should be able to see clearly that if the big dog really attacks you, Harry, Navigation, Ron, and Hermione will be the last one. The worst thing is that you will be bitten into 3 pieces. Kesensis became more and more angry as he talked. In the evening, he and Snape went to load the potion launcher in the piston door. As for an adult wizard like Snape, before entering, Kesensis clearly saw a layer of silver light flashing on his body, which should be the iron armor curse. Just like that, his defense was bitten by the 3-headed dog. What was even more frightening was that Kesensis knocked out the 3-headed dog later. The coma and sleep were seamlessly connected, which meant that the 3-headed dog didn't eat dinner. When the 4 of them were hiding, the 3-headed dog woke up in confusion and found 3 staple foods and a snack. You? Come on, you are just waiting for points to be deducted. No, I am also a professor. I will deduct points for you directly. 20 points will be deducted for each of the 4 Gryffindors. The 4 little wizards all lowered their heads. It was the first time they felt that Professor Kesensis, who was usually as gentle as the little sun, could be so scary when he got angry. His furious momentum is no less than that of Professor McGonagall, and his eloquence is no less than that of Snape. However, there was a sensitive little wizard who noticed a different emotion underneath the anger. I'm sorry, Professor. Neville lowered his head and said with a sobbing voice. Neville. Kesensis subconsciously wanted to squat down and comfort her, but he quickly realized that he still had to be serious again. Do you realize you made a mistake? No what? You shouldn't go to that classroom. Besides that, you guys can't see the situation clearly. Can't you use your brains to calculate, which is more terrifying, deducting points or dying? Yes, Professor, yes. Also, you can't rely on that luck anymore. I knocked the dog unconscious this afternoon, and you can't be sure whether it's asleep or unconscious. What if it wakes up or is hungry? Wake up? Neville? Kesensis looked at the small bubble that had appeared on the floor beneath Neville's feet, and he sighed with his hands on his hips. Forget it. You should already know the seriousness of this matter. And you learned from this? Next time you encounter something, weigh the pros and cons in your mind. Even though this sounds like Slytherin, the first part was said by the 4 of them together, and the second part was said by Ron alone. The characteristics of the 4 houses are all advantages. You can't turn a blind eye to Slytherin's advantages, or even ignore them just because you hate Slytherin. Kesensis added. We will, Professor. Okay, let's go back now and go straight to your dormitory, Kesensis said, and pointed to the door, and the wooden door opened with a click. Forget it. I still don't trust you. After all, you're Gryffindor. I'll take you back. Professor, you don't have to do this. Neville looked at Kesensis with red eyes. Consider it helping you hide from Filch. The 5 of them were silent along the way until they arrived in front of the Gryffindor Tower. After watching the 4 of them all enter the cave behind the fat lady, Kesensis' originally serious face relaxed. The serious expression is really tiring. I don't know how Severus can keep it up 24 hours a day. And my flesh link, for 2 full hours. Filch said yes, these little wizards are indeed a bit too naughty. Gryffindor's little wizards are still a little bit stupid, Kesensis muttered to himself, and walked back to the office. Chapter 29. When he woke up, it was a new day. Kesensis climbed out of bed in confusion. Yesterday, the original alchemy experiment was shelved because of 4 naughty little Gryffindor wizards. Well, actually the words are not that accurate, it should be mindless. I don't know if Dumbledore took the wrong medicine that day, but he really asked Hagrid to use such a big 3-headed dog to complete the level. A very angry Kesensis came to the auditorium and ate a dry bar breakfast that was unique to England. He suddenly felt that this would be the end of his life. After breakfast, Kesensis did not return to the office. Instead, he went straight to the Forbidden Forest. He planned to find some test subjects. After all, he couldn't sew the Ender Pearl into his flesh just by slapping his forehead. That was not an experiment. It's courting death. On the way, we met Hagrid, who was holding his pet dog, or a hound, said to be called Yaya. Anyway, he asked curiously, "What are you doing in the Forbidden Forest?" "I need to do an alchemy experiment, and I need living experimental materials." Hagrid subconsciously looked up at the sky. Experimental material? Can chicken be used? It probably won't work. We wizards all have magical powers, and the same test subjects also need to have magical powers. Kesensis shook his head. I see. I can't understand you even if you tell me. Anyway, I wish you good luck. Hagrid's head almost exploded when he heard these so-called professional terms. In order to reduce the load on the blood vessels in his head, he quickly led Yaya away from Kesin. Hey, why are you running so far away? Let me tell you something more. After hearing this, Hagrid's steps became even faster. No, the way you talk is like the charms professor when I was a student. It's too scary, too scary. Well, I hope you can dream about that professor every night. Kesin said with his heartfelt blessing. Not far away, Hagrid suddenly tilted to one side while walking. In the afternoon, Kesin found a lot of magical animals outside the Forbidden Forest and locked them in different cages. It can be said that he has gained a lot. As for the specific creatures, he actually didn't know. He was simply walking in the Forbidden Forest. When he saw a magical animal, he threw an ender pearl and teleported to the side of it. Of course, for larger magical animals, just give it obsidian once. If it doesn't work, just give it twice. Carrying a series of cages, Kesin returned to the office under the strange looks of the little wizards coming and going. He neatly stacked them in the corner, prepared food and water, and ignored them. He summoned an enchantment table and stuffed the ender pearl into it. Soon an ender pearl, shining with purple light, appeared in his hand. Then he took out a grinding wheel, put the enchanted pearl on the grinding wheel and started shaking it. Each time he shook it, a segment of symbols would be ground out, including purple enchanting symbols and the original ender pearl. Rule symbols until a shattering sound sounded. Ah! Tom's voice. Your makeup is really exquisite. Is this a real injury? What did you do? You were so seriously injured. Why didn't you go to Madame Pomfrey? Sprout was walking in the corridor and was startled by the terrifying howling in Kesin's office, thinking he was in danger. After thinking for 2.5 seconds, she hurriedly opened the office door violently, and then saw Kesin, who had almost no good place on his body. Originally, wizards were very good at treating trauma. As long as they were not contaminated with any black magic, they could easily be treated with a simple spell or some fresh food. In a situation like Kesin's with large bruises all over his body. Or is this a new fashion for you young people? No, it's just that I haven't had time to go yet. I'm researching new alchemy methods. Kesin shook his head and wrote the symbols that had just been ground out of the grinding wheel on the parchment beside him. Next, you only need to use the enchantment table to enchant these symbols on the body. Anyway, I'm relieved to see you're fine. I've got this for you. If you're embarrassed to go out and let the little wizard see you in such a mess, you can wipe it yourself. Professor Sprout took it out of his pocket. I bought a bottle of white essence and put it on the table. Thank you, Professor. I won't bother you here to study magic. Professor Sprout had just walked out of the room and closed the door when another voice came from the office. Ah! Young people today are so pretty. Until the evening, Kesin controlled the cotton swab to smear his whole body with white essence. While looking at the dense enchantment symbols on the parchment, he felt that his suffering was not in vain. Now he only has one idea. Sleep. The next day, evening. Tisk. Tsk. Tisk. Kesin placed a magical animal that was possessed by magic and died in the cauldron nearby, where an elf would take it away and take it to the kitchen from time to time. In fact, his experiment was very close to success. According to the enchantment theory of the enchantment table, each item has its own enchantment symbol. So do people. All he needs is to fill the enchantment symbols belonging to the ender pearl into the gaps of the enchantment symbols on the human body. And it was precisely this last step that stumped him. It wasn't that it was difficult, but the enchantment symbols of magical animals were too dense, and he couldn't find a place to sneak in. In the end, it won't be directly inserted into the human body, right? I won't die on this, right? Will I explode the equipment? For example, the entire office was filled with a massive amount of cubes in an instant. Well, Kesin is not a serious person. No matter what he thinks about, he will be filled with cold jokes that suddenly appear in his mind. Dong dong dong. The door was suddenly knocked. He waved his hand, and the door opened with a click. Professor Kesin? We are here to apologize to you. Kesin glanced at Harry and Neville. They were the only two. You don't need to apologize to me. You just need to understand what you did wrong. Most mistakes can be made up for, and you won't make them again in the future. Kesin put his hands on his hips and let out a sigh of relief. Well, Professor, are you disappointed in me? Neville suddenly raised his head and asked. No, I'm not disappointed in any of you. Really? Kesin nodded. That's good. Neville breathed a sigh of relief, and then he took out a small package from his waist. Professor, I prepared a gift for you before. I hope you like it, but I remember I put it here. Chapter 30. Don't worry, you can find it slowly. By the way, based on the dangerous things you have done before, I found that you are not a fuel-efficient lamp, so I give this to you. Keisen comforted, while summoning an ender pearl. When you encounter a danger that you can't resist, just smash this thing to pieces, and I will appear in front of you. You can do it in Hogwarts. This thing is not in the category of apparition. Neville blushed and took the ender pearl, and found an embarrassing problem. He forgot to carry the gift. Harry noticed Neville's embarrassment and changed the subject for him. By the way, Professor, are you planning to attend today's Halloween dinner? Keisen looked at the calendar on the corner of the table and suddenly realized, time flies so fast. When I asked why Professor Sprout asked me about my makeup first, she thought I was trying on makeup. Will the professor go? Neville asked as he put away the ender pearls. Don't worry, I'll go, but you have to let me clean up after myself. I haven't left the house for nearly a day and a half. Keisen spread his hands, and Harry and Neville also left the office. When he had free time, Keisen put away the book on the table that recorded the enchantment symbols of the ender pearl, walked into the office, took a comfortable bath, and then opened the closet and started to look good. Soon, Keisen, wearing a dark purple robe, appeared at the professor's chair. In fact, the robe was black at first, but after witnessing the three-headed dog defeating Snape, Keisen immediately lamented the danger of Hogwarts and enchanted himself a set of battle wizard robes overnight. At this moment, it can also serve as a dress. To be honest, the robe is nice, Dumbledore said, looking at Keisen's shining robe. Pretty good. Maybe you could help with my socks. Well, you always get cold as you get older. I wish it were a new pair of socks. Impossible. Okay, Dumbledore said a little aggrievedly. Just when everything was quiet, Professor Quirrell suddenly ran into the auditorium out of breath. Dumbledore. Troll. There's a troll in the castle. Quirrell said at the end and drew it without even taking a breath. It seems that the Halloween party will not be held, Dumbledore complained softly, and then stood up. Young wizards from the 4 major colleges, follow your prefects and return to your lounge as soon as possible. Don't be left behind. All professors, now go search the inside and outside of the castle to find this giant monster. I guess it was Quirrell who let it in. The thief shouts, catch the thief. I'm happy to tell you that you guessed it right. Dumbledore agreed in a low voice. Merlin, Keisen complained softly, and quickly took out his wand and left the professor's seat, walking towards the direction where Quirrell rushed out. He walked slowly. Hogwarts is so big, and finding a giant monster in it is definitely not an easy task. If there are no accidents, it is possible to look for it all night. And the little wizards were all evacuated back to their respective lounges, and the damage a troll could do was nothing more than destroying buildings. Then isn't it time for you to show off your skills? He had already thought about having an architectural feast in front of all the wizards in the school and giving Hogwarts a big civil engineering shock. Then he felt an ender pearl shatter, and the next moment he appeared in a somewhat dilapidated corridor with 2 little wizards in front of him. Harry was slumped in a corner not far away. Neville's leg was broken, and he was looking at his sudden appearance with a look of joy on his face. Then he hurriedly pointed behind him. Keisen looked back and saw Ron strangling the giant monster's neck from behind. Unfortunately, the troll didn't have a neck, and Hermione in the corner, must have been knocked unconscious. Professor, be careful. I don't know who shouted it, but in short, the troll noticed the wizard who suddenly appeared in front of him. Although his little mind couldn't understand how the wizard appeared here, he still instinctively picked up the wooden stick, smashed it over. Clang. Keisen stood there and took the heavy blow abruptly. It's not that he was acting like a superior, he just didn't react. Fortunately, he had shamelessly enchanted his robe more than 10 times before. The blow that could have knocked out his brains only made Keisen feel like someone had knocked him on the head. Not even the defense was broken. Professor, are you okay? Keisen shook his head. Ron, stay away from here. Ron was relieved when he saw Keisen coming here. He jumped down from the back of the troll nimbly, picked up Hermione in 3 steps and ran behind Keisen. Seeing that Ron and Hermione were far away, Keisen felt relieved and led the troll to the corner of the corridor. When he reached a similar position and confirmed that the 4 little wizards could not be affected, he held the A square with flashing white light appeared directly. He pressed it hard into the troll's chest, then quickly summoned an ender pearl and left the place. Bang! He appeared in front of Ron and Neville, and an obsidian wall blocked the flesh and blood from the explosion. However, should I say it or not, this big guy really stinks. Keisen frowned and complained, then one on his left hand, one on his right hand and one on his back. Ron followed, and the 5 of them walked directly towards the hospital wing. After handing all 4 young wizards to Madame Pomfrey, Kesin found Dumbledore. You should feed that Quirrell a bottle of Veritaserum. A troll almost killed 4 little wizards. I'm sure he won't let more than one in. Dumbledore patted Kesin's shoulder reassuringly. Relax, relax. I have determined that there is only one troll, and that troll has been blown into a pulp by you.
Just relax.
This is best, but I still think you should control Quirrell. If you can't save face, I can put a sack on him in the middle of the night to ensure that he can't leave his butt in a wheelchair before the Christmas vacation. Dumbledore looked at Kesin strangely. I didn't know you were so radical. After all, you have always been quite Buddhist in your behavior before. Now that he has thrown trolls into Hogwarts, what else can he not dare to do? At this time, do I still have to stand and talk without hurting my back, saying that Quirrell is an innocent and good man? He is already an enemy, Kesin said with some excitement. I understand, but you can rest assured, really? Chapter 31. Kesin looked at Dumbledore's calm look and was silent for a rare moment. Then he said, You have everything under control. What about today? What happened today was an accident. You will regret it one day if you continue like this. Maybe, but before that, I am still the principal of Hogwarts, and I have the right. Bang! Kesin punched Dumbledore on the slightly crooked bridge of his nose, then left the office angrily, slamming the door with a loud bang. Familiar strength, Dumbledore sighed, covering his nose. If he uses a little more force, my nose might be able to be straightened. Kesin left the office and was walking towards the medical wing. Then, satisfaction +10 from Dumbledore, trust from Dumbledore +10, favorability +10 from Dumbledore? Could this be some kind of pornographic fetish? Kesin shuddered subconsciously, and then quickly shook the matter out of his mind. He walked all the way to the hospital wing and rushed into Quirrell's ward while Madame Pomfrey wasn't paying attention. He was wondering whether he should use an anvil or obsidian, or directly use the withered skull to blow Quirrell to pieces, along with the Voldemort behind his head. Kesin, a deep voice came from behind him. Kesin looked back and whispered, Severus, we need to talk. If Dumbledore asked you to come, I'm sorry, at least until I finish solving this matter. Snape nodded calmly and turned around cooperatively. Kesin turned Quirrell over, face down and back up. In the end, he still didn't use the withered skull, but he still took out the obsidian, smashed it into powder along his spine, and hit the back of his head more than 10 times. In the end, it was Snape who listened to his weird voice, grabbed Kesin who was committing violence, looked at him and shook his head. Call. Kesin followed Snape out of the hospital wing. The latter walked in front and suddenly said, That is not a serious injury to Madame Pomfrey. I didn't really want to kill him. Well, I have ideas, but I still have reason. Although I don't know Dumbledore's specific plan, I respect it. I just thought that if those 2 guys stay in the hospital bed for a few more days, Hogwarts can live in peace for a few more days. Kesin explained. I have to say, you are a truly good person, Snape commented after listening to the thoughts behind him. I will take your words as a compliment. Kesin nodded. It's up to you. You don't have to think so much. Dumbledore has never told you that he is a completely good person. Did you know that he has a nickname, called the White Devil? I have been mentally prepared before. I also know that it is impossible for a good person in the traditional sense to become the principal of a magic school, let alone that the school has to compete with the Ministry of Magic. I just hate his kind. I can't tell, but his arrogance has already made the 4 little wizards almost go to see Merlin, but he still kept saying that it was planned and under control. I couldn't hold it back for a moment. Maybe I should apologize to him sometime. Snape quietly became a listener, and when he heard Kesin give Dumbledore a sharp blow on the bridge of his nose, he smiled fiercely. Seriously, you did what I always wanted to do. Maybe, but why? Is it also because of the safety of the little wizard?
No.
A fight against workers' grievances against their bosses? No, this issue is more complicated. Okay. Kesin shrugged and stopped talking. Dumbledore asked me to confirm that you are just here to make Quirrell temporarily lose his ability to cause trouble and to vent his anger. Now my task is completed, and I remember that you have no classes next. Maybe find some time to relax.
Way.
Snape said suddenly as he walked in front. Wow, is this comfort? If you think so, then this is it. Thank you. Maybe I will find a small room and decorate it, such as Hagrid's hut. I have always wanted to bulldoze that small house and rebuild it. As you wish. After returning to the office, Kaysen sat weakly on the office chair, leaning back and putting his feet on the desk. He was too anxious just now. He should have looked at Harry Navi and the others before smashing Quirrell's spine. The order was wrong. Now he doesn't plan to go, or can't go. After all, he is really not good at lying. At that time, Madame Pomfrey asked him angrily, "Do you know who usually has a grudge against Professor Quirrell?" He absolutely couldn't hold back at that time. Absolutely, you might even laugh out loud. Just as he was maintaining such an extremely comfortable posture and feeling the greatness of ergonomics, there was a knock on the office door. "I didn't lock the door. Please come in." Dumbledore had a piece of gauze stuck on the bridge of his nose, and there seemed to be a fixed clip, and walked in with a fruit basket in his hand. "Kaysen, I apologize for my arrogance." Dumbledore came in and put the fruit basket on the desk. Kaysen awkwardly put his feet down from the desk. "I wasn't hurt by you. You should go to Harry and Neville to apologize, and Hermione too. And Ron, to be honest, he really deserves to be a Gryffindor." At that time, he even wanted to wrap his arms around the troll's neck and choke it, even though the troll's neck was thicker than his waist. "They have woken up and I sincerely apologize to them. Now I'm here to apologize to you. My arrogance hurt the heart of a great professor who truly loves Hogwarts and the little wizard." Dumbledore sat down and said earnestly, "It feels a bit awkward. And don't look at me like that, it's quite disgusting," Kaysen said with some chill. Dumbledore shook his head. "Okay." Kaysen sat up a little straighter. He was not very good at talking about these big things, so he chose to change the topic. "I don't know your specific plan, but now that Quirrell has been disabled by me, he should be unable to do anything while his new spine grows out." "I'm glad you didn't kill him directly," Dumbledore said. "Actually, I did. But when I think about the Voldemort you mentioned is so difficult to kill, putting him under your nose is a good idea. Thank you for your understanding." Chapter 32. A week later, Kaysen was in the office unhappily, fiddling with the enchantment table in front of him. Because he still underestimated Madame Pomfrey's skills, Quirrell, who was beaten to a semi-crippled state, appeared on the stage of the defense against the dark arts classroom again a week later. Also unhappy with him was Snape. However, the two of them were unhappy about something different. Kaysen was because Quirrell had once again acted like a monster. Snape, on the other hand, was offered the job of defense against the dark arts substitute professor just a week ago. But now he forcibly cleared out the sinful thoughts related to Quirrell from his head and continued to study the enchantment table in front of him. He has been studying for a week to enchant the magic of the Ender Pearl into his body. It can be said that everything is ready, except for a shiver. Several pieces of lapis lazuli suddenly appeared in his hand, and he placed them on the enchantment table. "When I used to enchant wands and wizard robes, I just used a huge amount of magic power to fill them up. But now to enchant yourself, you have to be as professional as possible. After all, it is really easy to kill someone." The next moment, he directly placed the book in his hand on the enchanting table and floated directly. In an instant, the text symbols were extracted from the book, and combined with the magic power, a purple light was slowly generated. Phew! Pong! Dumbledore, who was in the principal's office, felt his heart skip a beat when he heard the loud noise. "Mrs. Whitedress, do you know what's going on?" he asked towards a portrait who came to the principal's office as a guest. "I'm going to ask." Mrs. Whitedress left the portrait and came back not long after. There was an explosion in the alchemy office, and Professor Kesensis disappeared. Dumbledore's originally calm face suddenly stiffened. "I hope nothing happened to him." He stood up, thought for a moment, and apparat directly into the alchemy office. At this moment, the office was blown up by a horrific explosion, and Kaysen appears in every corner of the office. It's not an advanced clone technique, it's just that his teleportation speed is too fast. "Dumbledore, help me, I can't stop." Dumbledore took out the Elder Wand and tapped it. Kaysen, who had been unable to control his teleportation, finally stopped, or was pulled by a more powerful space. Every time he teleports out, he will be moved back by a more powerful and weird space force. Hell, Merlin. It seems I should redecorate this office. After returning to normal, Kaysen patted his chest in fear. "Before that, would you mind letting me know what you are doing?" Dumbledore found a fairly complete stool and sat down and said, "Look at this thing." Kaysen threw the Ender Pearl directly to Dumbledore. "This thing is made of alchemy. What is its use?" "Smash him to pieces." Dumbledore nodded and threw it to the ground. With a buzz, Kaysen appeared directly at the place where the Ender Pearl shattered. "Oh, it's really wonderful alchemy, really," Dumbledore praised. But you still haven't told me why you bombed this place into a wasteland. Kesen's expression suddenly became constipated. After thinking about it, he still took out the booklet about the combination of flesh and blood alchemy that he copied from Forbidden Alchemy. Dumbledore looked through it and said, "You should call me, because this is really very dangerous. I have experimented many times, and the success rate has reached a very impressive level." "How many?" "It's as high as 24%, which is a 24% probability." Dumbledore was a little helpless. "I sincerely hope that you will cherish your own life as much as you cherish the life of the little wizard." Kesen shrugged. "Relax, just think I'm playing a joke. The real probability is definitely not as low as I said. Relax." "I hope so. Can I let go of your restraint now?" Dumbledore sighed. "It's almost there. I feel like I can control myself." Dumbledore took out his wand and clicked it. The next moment, Kesen felt that his whole body had never been so free as at this moment. With just a thought, he appeared behind Dumbledore. "It's really good." He sighed. Pretty good." From that day on, Kesen's life seemed to be in simple mode. Not to mention other things, the usual commuting time that he hated the most was shortened to 1 to 2 seconds, because at the beginning it was easy for him to teleport to the potions classroom downstairs from the alchemy classroom. It's embarrassing. But this is not an important thing, because Mrs. Huachi, the flying course professor, is sitting on the sofa in the corner of his office, and there is a huge suitcase in front of her. "I'm glad you opened the door for me. It saves me the trouble of taking a few guys back to their factory floor." Kaizen nodded. "Of course I will open the door for you. But this is, what is this?" "A full set of Quidditch balls, a quaffle, 2 bludgers, and a golden snitch. This year's Quidditch Cup is about to begin. I have to collect all these balls before the game. You are obedient, so I came to find you," Mrs. Huachi said with a smile. "Of course, but to be honest, don't have too high expectations for me. I have never been exposed to this thing before." Kesen took the suitcase containing the 4 balls and opened it with a click. The golden snitch was about to flap its wings and fly away. Fortunately, it was tightly contained by the box. "This little guy is really energetic." He tapped with his left hand and touched with his right hand. Finally he asked, "Mrs. Hooch, should all Quidditch balls have magic to prevent curses?" "This is natural, just like the bludger. You have also seen how big it is. If it does not follow the rules of Quidditch and hits a person, it can really easily kill the player." While Mrs. Chi responded, "That's it. I'm sorry, Mrs. Huachi. You should take good care of this group of balls in the future. Their defensive magic has been erased." Kaizen firmly grasped a huge wandering ball with both hands. Ball and walked towards the enchanting table not far away. In less than a minute, all 4 balls were blessed. "Thank you so much, Professor Kesen. Otherwise these balls might really cause a big mess." Mrs. Huachi thanked her while holding a huge suitcase. "Mrs. Huachi, you may be mistaken. It's not that there may be a big mess, but there will definitely be a big mess." Chapter 33. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Huachi asked. "I just took a look at the remaining magic circuits of this set of balls. They are very strong and cannot be erased by some naughty little wizard. So, then it can only be a professor with strong magic power. There is someone with ulterior motives in Hogwarts." Kesen explained. Will this affect the start of the Quidditch Cup?" Forehead. "That's it, because Mrs. Hooch is really unreliable. So I asked Dumbledore to let me come over and do an inspection on all your broomsticks before the Quidditch Cup starts, and of course the game. Use the ball. Although most broomsticks have magic circuits to prevent curses, if someone can do it on the Quidditch ball, he might be able to do it on your broomstick." Kesen was holding the enchanting table and re-enchanting the golden snitch in his hand, while explaining to Harry beside him. "Mr. Wood, the golden snitch." After re-enchanting the last ball, he said to Oliver Wood, "Oh, thank you, Professor. You're welcome. Bring all your brooms over here. I'll check them one by one, and maybe re-enchant them." Kesen took out his quill and rewrote the runic characters of the defensive curse unique to the broom on the book. Then the broomsticks passed by the enchantment table like a cue, and the broomsticks shining with purple light returned to their owner's hands. "Slytherin classmates, please come and check the brooms." The Slytherin players also gathered around. "Professor Kesen, I am Marcus Flint from the Flint family." Marcus, the captain of Slytherin, stretched out his hand towards Kesen. "Nice to meet you, Marcus." Kesen reached out and shook Flint's hand. "Your broom? Well, Professor Kesen, we Slytherins don't have this need. In my eyes, you are all young wizards with fragile lives. Unfortunately, I can't take this risk. I don't want you all to regard yourselves as Dark Wizard reserves. Don't think that the Dark Wizard will show mercy to you. Kaizen, he shook his head and said forcefully. Kaizen took a broom, placed it on the enchanting table, and started chattering again. To be honest, I have never thought that you Slytherins are the so-called Dark Wizard reserves, and I don't want you to think so because you give up on yourself. In other words, I don't want you to have some weird sense of identification with some Dark Wizards because they were Slytherins when they were at Hogwarts. You may identify with them, but they won't have any identification with you.
Agree.
Kaizen finished enchanting the broomsticks of the Slytherin students while nagging, then picked up the enchanting table, shrank them, and put them in his pocket.
Fight well.
After he finished speaking, there was only a roar, and the next moment he disappeared and appeared in the professor's stand. You have helped me a lot, Kaizen, Dumbledore said with a smile. It's okay. It's easy. I just hope that guy with ulterior motives can be careful and don't let me catch his chicken feet, Kaizen said with a gloomy face, his eyes always drifting towards Quirrell sitting in front of him intentionally or unintentionally. Don't be like this. Maybe you should relax, Kaizen. As you say, Hogwarts is the safest place in the world. Professor Flitwick comforted him. Oh, I hope so. The Quidditch match ended smoothly, and the normal game ended extremely smoothly. As for the winner, the referee said that Gryffindor won anyway, but how exactly did it win? Forgive me for not seeing it. Really, Dumbledore. A group of people are flying in the sky on broomsticks. I can't even see clearly. Is it really so beautiful? Kaizen followed Dumbledore and left the stand. Complained somewhat helplessly. This is the unique fun of Quidditch. Go back and borrow some books from Mrs. Pants, and you will find the fun contained in it. I still prefer building, Kaizen spits. There will be. I still say what I said. The trouble starts in my office. Wait until I have time. After walking down the stands, Kaizen finally returned to his usual moving speed. He never liked walking too fast. He prefers to wander along the road and feel the rhythm of slow life. Oh, by the way, there are also other people who like slow speed like him. Okay, it doesn't look like the same thing. Severus, your leg hasn't healed yet? Kaizen asked in a low voice, looking at Snape who was limping. After all, it is a wound contaminated by dark magic. Perhaps I can make you a crutch? If you don't like a wheelchair, of course a cane will also work, a must-have for an English gentleman, or a scepter will do. Kaizen calmly put his arm around Snape's shoulders, and then lifted him up. From behind, it looked like they were holding each other's shoulders. For example, I really can't believe that the relationship between Professor Kaizen and Snape is so good. The four little ones followed Kaizen from a distance, while Ron looked surprised. Professor Kaizen has such a good relationship with everyone. But why is he like this with Snape? Harry muttered with some displeasure. Wow, Harry just won the game. Why does he feel so bad? Ron said with some confusion. Of course, because Professor Kaizen was deceived by a dark wizard. What's the meaning? Didn't I go to the library to borrow books before, and then I met Snape? At that time, he lifted up his trouser legs in the stairwell and poured a bottle of red potion on his trouser legs. The wound looked like it was bitten by a wild animal, Harry said vividly. Are you trying to say which three-headed dog bit that wound? But that doesn't mean he is a dark wizard, right? Hermione said. Of course I have my evidence. I still remember that day in the room where the three-headed dog was kept. Do you still remember what was under the three-headed dog's body? Harry looked at the three friends around him. Neville shook his head. I have a bad memory. Is there something under the three-headed dog? Ron still performed steadily. A trapdoor, Hermione said, recalling. It's that trapdoor. Combined with the three-headed dog being locked there, it proves that something is hidden under the trapdoor, and that thing should be hidden by Dumbledore, and the three-headed dog is here to protect that thing. Huh, Lee said seriously with an understood expression on his face. Chapter 34. You mean, Snape was bitten because he wanted to get something guarded by the three-headed dog? Well, judging by the size, it should be the three-headed dog that did it, but it's just not deep enough. Maybe he's wearing thick pants. Actually it might be armor for protection, Neville added. Oh, is that so? Harry was a little embarrassed. But I remember Professor Kaizen said before that he knocked out the three-headed dog. Maybe the trapdoor was just a coincidence. Hermione frowned. Perhaps Professor Kaizen was also one of the people guarding that thing, and he wanted to check it out? Neville said. How about we just ask Professor Kaizen directly? What do you think? Is this what you came here for? Kaizen poured black tea for the four little wizards in front of him, because the green tea before was indeed a bit bitter. Yes, there is definitely something wrong with that Snape, Harry said seriously. Don't worry, he's fine. And, be respectful, Professor Snape, say so. Well, there's definitely something wrong with Professor Snape. Is it because of that wound? I can explain that there are a series of mechanisms to protect that thing. Many professors, including me, Snape, and Professor McGonagall, all have them. At that time, I designed a mechanism together with Snape, but he was accidentally bitten by a three-headed dog when he and I were adjusting the mechanism. Not those conspiracy theories you're talking about. The four little ones fell silent, and soon Harry found another clue. Professor, who did that protective magic that was wiped off the Quidditch ball and our broomsticks? I know, but I can't say it, because if that guy knew you were investigating him, he would really kill someone. First of all, he is a male. Professor Kesensis, you said he is not Snape? It is easy to guess, after all. There are only a few people in total. Hermione complained after taking a sip of black tea, because this thing was caused by Dumbledore's guy slapping his head. To be honest, I never agree with such ridiculous things. Anyway, forget it, Dumbledore. It's Dumbledore. ×4, No, where did you think you were going? Kesensis said with strange eyes. Oh, that's good. I'm not talking about Dumbledore, but I'm very angry about Dumbledore's behavior of ignoring the presence of dark wizards in Hogwarts, so I complained. As for the real dark wizard, to be honest, rather than checking it out on your own, it would be better for me to tell you directly and stay away from him then. Kesensis said so, but he actually knew that for these bold little Gryffindor wizards, it was impossible to stay away from the dark wizards, as he said. They will only explore more crazily. However, since the so-called headmaster, Dumbledore, has spoken, saying that justice will defeat evil, Voldemort must be killed by Harry, and Harry will definitely confront Quirrell or Voldemort. Then give it in advance, he revealed a few clues and got a vaccination. At least they won't be left with no way to investigate in the end. They have no choice but to go to Quirrell and ask, Professor Quirrell, there is a dark wizard in Hogwarts. Do you know who it is? Isn't that nonsense? Damn prophecy. What the hell? Kalina Quillo, he said. Professor Quirrell? The one who stutters when giving lectures and smells like garlic. Ron was the first to say in disbelief. I'm sorry to tell you that it's him, Kesensis said with a shrug. But Professor Quirrell, is he like that? Hermione frowned. Professor, are you really not just making this up to divert our attention? Do bad people have bad people written on their faces? Just like me, if I don't say it, do you know that I actually have to eat 4 little wizards every day to maintain my youthful appearance? Okay, I know this joke is a bad joke. Well, it's actually quite funny, Professor. It's very funny when you say it. Harry twitched the corner of his mouth and complained. Don't pay attention to this joke. You just need to know that Quirrell is not a good person. Just stay away from him. But I still don't understand what bad things Professor Quirrell can do. Ron frowned. That's a lot. For example, the troll at the Halloween dinner. Guess who put it in? Kesensis raised his eyelids and said, That's what Quirrell did? Now I've made this matter clear to you. So please promise me that this matter is currently under Dumbledore's control, and there is no need for you first-year little beans to intervene. So I sincerely request you to stay away from Quirrell when you are not in class. Kaizen nagged earnestly. But I still don't understand that anyone in Hogwarts is more likely than Quirrell. Even that old guy Filch. At least his tone really has the hatred to strangle me. Ron looked at the ceiling made of dark oak planks, somewhat puzzled. Specifically, you can ask your brothers, the Weasley twins. You can ask them what kind of person Professor Quirrell was before, what kind of person he is now, and why he was such a positive wizard from before. It turned into this weird look. Kesensis gave them an idea. We can, Professor, Neville said. Whether you can, I hope you can. Kesensis sighed. After sending the 4 little ones away, Kesensis sat on the sofa for a while, drank the rest of the tea in the teapot, walked out of the office, and walked straight to the principal's office.
Lemon Olaf.
The 2 stone statues outside the principal's office were separated, and Dumbledore had made 2 cups of green tea early. After all, Dumbledore knew that Kesensis didn't like sweet things, and he couldn't help but put sugar in black tea when he made it. Thank you for taking care of my taste, Kesensis said, taking a sip of green tea. What's the matter? It's Harry and the 4 of them. They knew that there was a dark wizard inside Hogwarts. After they came to ask me, I confessed in order to prevent them from doing extra work that might cause trouble. Frank. I shook Quirrell out, Kesensis said frankly. Chapter 35. This is the integration package I am playing, and this is his conversion table synthesis table. There is a saying I don't know whether to say or not. In that case, let them be. Kaysen left the principal's office, and that sentence was Dumbledore's answer. In response, he implicitly gave Dumbledore a slowly raised middle finger. Let them be. It certainly sounded like Dumbledore's character. Let nature take its course, and he had no problem with that. There is no objection, but he also has his own little idea and little plan. Dumbledore controls the big strategy, and he respects his wisdom after living for more than 100 years and does not refute it. But he should also allow himself to take some innocuous little actions within a certain range. And it can also add stumbling blocks to Quirrell's path to becoming a monster, so why not? Not even Dumbledore can stop this. The last physical attack caused devastating injuries to Quirrell. With Madame Pomfrey's treatment, Quirrell was successfully discharged from the hospital in just 1 week. But this time, he decided to be more fancy. But unfortunately not now, because now he is busy organizing his 7th grade students to go to the European Alchemy Exchange Association's dinner, and their papers on iron golems have come to fruition earlier than the 4th grade papers on enchantment tables. All the wizards who signed the paper were invited to attend tonight's party, which was, of course, an awards party for them. At the edge of the Black Lake in the evening, Kaysen was wearing an aqua-blue wizard robe, which was really sparkling with magic fluctuations like the water. He was critically examining the dozen 7th grade wizards in front of him, even though they were no longer young. Casri, where's your brooch? There is also a thread on the sleeve. Please pull that thread off. After this party, you will take a group photo with me. This group photo will be published in the next issue. Alchemy Journal and Daily Prophet. Please bring some refreshments. As Kaysen said this, he handed a smart and elegant brooch that appeared in his hand to Casli. Ah, it's the professor. Casli quickly pulled off the thread, took the brooch with both hands, and pinned it to her chest. Mars, leather shoes, look at your leather shoes. They are dull. Is that right? Neckline, right? If you feel your collar is uncomfortable like that, you can just turn it out. Your shirt and jacket can indeed be matched like that. Has no one seen you? After adjusting the clothes of many young wizards, he looked at his watch again, raised his head, and continued. It's a pity that you are already in 7th grade. If you were not so pressed for time, I would have asked you to study some more valuable propositions, but you don't have enough time. I can only offer a crude alchemy creation like the iron golem as a gift for your 7th grade. And your names signed by your hands on this paper may make your future more open. Because I can only teach you for 1 year, I can only make up for you from this place. Now, take a deep breath. In 1 minute, you will go to the banquet hall of the Ministry of Magic, where the top scholars of alchemy will. Reporters from the Daily Prophet and senior officials from the Ministry of Magic will be waiting for you there. Cheer up, ladies and gentlemen, for the sake of your own future, Kaysen said in a deep voice. Professor, we know. I don't know which wizard was sentimental. Maybe he heard Kaysen thinking hard about their future, or maybe he was complaining about why he didn't meet such a professor until he was in 7th grade. In short, the little wizard's voice had a rare hint of crying. Casli, please control your emotions. In order to give them a good impression later, do you need to touch up your makeup? Kaysen walked up to the witch named Casli and handed her a handkerchief. Casli shook her head, wiped her tears, and quietly put the handkerchief into her pocket. As long as you are happy. Kaysen witnessed this scene and shrugged helplessly. Soon, the time was up, and Kaysen took out a pocket, where was a stack of door keys that had been mailed to him early. 1 person per person. Everyone, please pay attention to your manners. This semester is about to pass. I can't give you anything more. But fortunately, I can still help you at this party. Protect me. Maybe I can say so. Kaysen divided the door keys one by one and placed them in front of Casli. The sentimental little witch took the door keys and suddenly gave Kaysen a hug. Okay, I hope this makes you happy. Kaysen patted the little witch on the back and comforted her. I know how to do it, Professor. Soon, 1 door key after another was handed into everyone's hands. As time reached that mark, all of them, including Kaysen, felt a strange space force pulling them. It was brought to a huge and luxurious venue. Kaizen had previously enchanted the power of the Ender Pearl into his body. In those short few minutes, he teleported in his office more times than most people would in a lifetime. So after he appeared at the venue, it was almost instantaneous. He regained his composure. The students who followed him did not have the same determination as him, but they all kept in mind what Kaysen said. Keep the tone, keep the elegance. Fortunately, none of them made a fool of themselves. They were all good people. Soon, Kaysen noticed several reporters approaching with magic cameras hanging on their chests. He naturally waved to the students standing behind him. Soon, A neat group photo appeared in one of the reporter's cameras. Excellent photography skills. Kason looked at the dynamic photos taken by the reporter and made sure that everyone in them maintained their posture, and there were no small movements like not opening their eyes, yawning, or being drowsy. He said sincerely, stretched out his hand, and shook the reporter's hand. "Professor, what should we do next?" A student appeared calmly behind Kason and asked in a low voice. "Be still and watch what happens, and then consider yourself as a teacher to subdue them." The next day, Kason looked at the headlines in the new issue of the Daily Prophet, and his photos with his students were clearly hanging on them. The words on the headlines used neat and elegant language to praise himself and the students among them. The words of praise were not stingy at all, which made Kason blush. I'm a little embarrassed." Chapter 36. It had been some time since the last alchemy party, and almost the entire Hogwarts expressed envy of the 7th-year alchemy party that was so popular. But behind the excitement, there are always people who can notice something else, such as Harry. He noticed that since that day they went to Professor Cason's office and learned that the real dark wizard hidden in Hogwarts was actually the timid Professor Quirrell. As long as Professor Cason and Professor Quirrell are within the same space, the weird smell of gunpowder will always fill the nasal cavity. I don't know why. Maybe it was his misunderstanding. I always feel that Professor Cason is looking for trouble with Quirrell all the time, as long as they are together. In the library, Harry whispered to the 4 friends around him. Of course, a powerful and hateful wizard like Professor Cason naturally doesn't have a good attitude towards dark wizards. This is perfectly normal. Neville echoed. Everyone knows this truth. I just think that if Professor Cason, an alchemist, targets Quirrell, a dark wizard, one day, if Quirrell is forced to lose control, what should he do if he assassinates Professor Cason? Hermione responded while writing her paper. Professor Cason is very powerful. He can blow up that giant monster with just one move. Didn't you see it that day? It exploded all over the wall. Neville heard that Cason's combat power was underestimated. Immediately retorted. Of course, I'm not saying that Professor Cason is not powerful enough. But what if Professor Quirrell has a more sinister curse, black magic, or the like? Hermione retorted. Well, Professor Cason actually knows black magic. He saved Hagrid, who was entangled by dark wizards in Nocturne Alley. At that time, he used a skull magic to kill the 3 dark wizards. Harry added, "That's not black magic. How could Professor Cason use black magic?" "But that's a skeleton. That's not black magic either." Harry watched the stubborn Neville lose his temper, and he didn't know how to retort. I remember that the first thing we talked about wasn't Professor Cason picking on Quirrell. How did it end up with black magic?" Ron suddenly joined the group chat at this time and asked, a little confused. Cason, one of the parties involved, had no idea about the quiet argument in the library, but he was able to answer their questions quickly. Because during a lunch in the auditorium, when Professor Quirrell was about to leave after finishing his meal, Cason stood up at the same time. The two of them bumped into each other. Cason was fine, but Quirrell was knocked over and squatted on his butt. At that moment, he finally broke through. It was obvious that not long ago, the well-dressed Professor Cason in front of him was quite friendly to him in the professor's lounge. Why, since that Halloween, this Cason seemed to have suddenly changed. It can't be said that he has changed. He was so friendly to other professors and wizards, even Hagrid and Filch. Only to myself. Quirrell angrily took out a handkerchief from his pocket, so fast that even Voldemort behind his head didn't react. "I want to duel with you." Cason tilted his head and reached out to take the handkerchief that was flying slowly. "Tell me the time." "Tonight, in the auditorium, under the witness of everyone. I will defeat you." Quirrell roared, and Voldemort behind his head rarely stopped him. He seemed to be happy to see it happen and wanted to take advantage of Quirrell. Luo came to test the skills of this suddenly rising alchemy professor. "Don't you stutter at this time? It's up to you. When the time comes, you can set up the arena. And remember to ask someone to come to me." Cason put the handkerchief into his pocket and said casually, "Dumbledore, I want to invite you to come and do this. Duel notary." Quirrell reacted, quickly recovered from his stuttering, and looked longingly at the man who was drinking a glass of lemonade. "Dumbledore. Oh. In that case, of course, no problem." Dumbledore agreed calmly. "In the evening auditorium, before dinner, I'll be here, waiting for you here." Quirrell looked at Cason with red eyes and said fiercely, Cason shrugged, as if he had completely ignored Quirrell's strange screams. He was thinking about whether he should give Quirrell a small quality shock, but in the end, he didn't speak. After all, there were so many young wizards here, and it would be bad if they taught them bad things. However, if you don't scold, you don't scold. You still have to take the appropriate actions. I saw Kesin moving with lightning speed. His momentum from bottom to top was like Mount Everest suddenly appearing between the worlds. A slender, straight middle finger was raised by him. Then Kesin turned around and left the auditorium with satisfaction. The episode in the auditorium ended quickly, and Quirrell rushed back to his defense against the dark arts office still angry. I may have thought that such a day would come, but I never thought that such a day would come so quickly. Really? Neville murmured inarticulately, still holding half a piece of bread in his mouth. No, I have to go to Professor Kesin's office. Harry only thought about it in his seat for just 2.5 seconds, then quickly stood up and ran towards the stairwell on the side of the auditorium. Hey, wait for us. Neville quickly threw down half a piece of bread, and Hermione wordlessly picked up the memory ball that Neville left on the table and the homework that was due in the afternoon. Finally, there was Ron, who was holding 2 fried chicken drumsticks, which he called a small stove for Professor Kaizen because he was afraid that Professor Kaizen would not have enough to eat, if it weren't for the 2 chicken drumsticks that he had already taken 2 bites of. After the 4 little wizards came to Kesin's office, they were embarrassed to find that the office was already overcrowded, and there were even people standing outside. The entire corridor was filled with little wizards in 3rd grade and above. The little wizards from the 4 major colleges have never worked hard in the same direction like they did here. Ron also spotted his 2 twin brothers at the door. Professor Kesin, Professor, as long as you open your mouth, we guarantee that Quirrell will not be able to leave the office. One of the twins shouted loudly. Professor, Gemini, look at me, I know black magic. Professor Kesin, I used my alchemy hand to rub a big baby. I'm sure to give Quirrell an awesome alchemy shock. Kesin cult, Professor Kesin. Can we still squeeze in? Ron wiped his oily mouth and said with the corners of his eyes twitching uncontrollably. Chapter 37. Are we still going in? Hermione asked as she looked at the huge crowd that could frighten a sociophobic patient to death. Go, why don't you go? Harry said and rushed in, using his small body to squeeze in. And Neville was not to be outdone. He was stronger than Harry, but unfortunately, he couldn't squeeze through the 3rd-year wizards. Professor Kaizen in the office had no choice but to stand on top of his desk in order to maintain order. To be honest, if this incident hadn't happened, he wouldn't have known that he was so popular among the students. Everyone, listen to me. I am very pleased with your arrival. But please believe me, I don't need dueling assistants or dueling agents, nor do I need you to help me assassinate Professor Quirrell in his office. Trust me, can you use my own power? The little wizards in the office and the little wizards in the corridor slowly regained their composure, and finally left his poor office with Kesin pleading like he begged his grandfather to sue his grandma. After another period of time, only Kaizen and 4 little wizards were left in the entire office. I hope you are not here to help me assassinate Quirrell. Of course we are not, Professor. Hermione explained quickly. Yeah, even if we have this idea, we don't have the strength, Harry said with a somewhat embarrassed smile. I sincerely hope you don't even have this idea, Kesin said. Oh, we will. By the way, are you confident in the duel? That's right. In fact, this is what I want. Even if Quirrell doesn't take the initiative to challenge me for a duel today, I will still challenge him. After all, if you allow him to move around in the castle, there is no chance of any other dangers. And if you can rely on this duel to reduce the scope of his activities to 1/3 of an acre in the hospital wing, it will be considered a benefit to Hogwarts. Safety made a small contribution. So, Professor, are you very confident? So be it. The duel time set by Quirrell was very fast. It was fast enough to throw gloves from the duel. Of course, Quirrell didn't wear gloves, so he threw a handkerchief. From the time of throwing the handkerchief to the time when the two stood on the duel stage, it was only a short time. Just 6 hours. At 6 o'clock in the afternoon, a duel platform suddenly appeared in the center of the auditorium. Kaizen and Quirrell stood in the center, each holding their own wands and pressing them against their chests. The one in the middle of the two was Snape. After Snape told the 2 people and the little wizards watching the meaning and rules of the duel, he asked them to bow to each other. Things have come to this, and both of them bowed to each other. After all, this is the dueling stage of Hogwarts, not WWE. Don't engage in the ritual of adding anger before a game. After bowing, the 2 turned around simultaneously and walked in their own directions. Following Snape's opening signal, the 2 turned around simultaneously. Quirrell first moved his wand from bottom to top. Oolong comes out of the hole. A giant python more than 4 meters long was suddenly summoned and rushed towards Keisen quickly. Keisen casually flicked his wand, and pixels of flames evenly covered the python's body. But he just turned sideways casually, letting the giant python brush his shadow and fall to the bottom of the high platform. After doing all this, he shrugged towards Quirrell and spread his hands like a bear, allowing people to understand the meaning in the blink of an eye.
That's it. It's not over yet.
Quirrell's wand then quickly moved towards Kaizen's feet, and the ground thorns spread towards his feet. Keisen stretched out his hand and scratched his chin, tapped his wand, and in an instant, the entire duel stage became an obsidian surface. The thorns that had grown out also fell to the ground and turned into powder due to their roots being cut off and losing their magic power supply. As soon as Keisen raised his head after admiring his masterpiece, he saw another silent spell coming from Quirrell. This curse is red, but according to Quirrell's urine, it's really not sure whether the one flying over is Expelliarmus or passed out. Of course, the greater possibility is that this will be shattered into pieces. Keisen stopped holding his hand and immediately stopped using his wand. He just stretched out his hand and waved upward. An obsidian wall blocked the spell, and accordingly the obsidian wall also turned into fragments on the ground. Quirrell's spell was just flattened, then waved up again, and a giant dragon composed of bright red flames rushed towards Keisen in a daze. Snape watched Quirrell cast the fire spell and quickly jumped off the platform, turning to look at Dumbledore. Dumbledore, on the other hand, waved his hand, signaling him to relax, and he seemed to be watching the fire-calming curse with great interest. Keisen on the stage was not as calm as Dumbledore. Although he still maintained his calm appearance, the damn flame in front of him didn't look like a serious flame. He held a wand in one hand and a ball of water in the other. At this time, grids composed of transparent cubes appeared in his mind on the dual platform, also divided into three-dimensional axes. It only takes a moment to fill all the space on the three-dimensional axis with water source blocks and stop them from flowing. Such a moment of space squeezing and filling should be able to directly plunder the living space of the fire in front of us, or it can be explained more simply. The sudden appearance of the water source block covered the calendar fire, just like a computer file covering another file. Just do it. Keisen looked at the huge fire dragon that was getting bigger and bigger and was almost reaching the ceiling of the auditorium. He threw the water source cube in the corner of the ground with one hand, and with the other hand he held the wand and lit it on the corner of the ceiling of Hogwarts. In an instant, a huge water cube appeared in front of the two of them. As for the fire dragon that was blocking the sky just now, it has long since disappeared without a trace. After annihilating the fire dragon, Keisen still hasn't forgotten why he started to find trouble with Quirrell and accepted Quirrell's duel now, in order to let this old boy stay in the hospital wing for a few more days. But he really just lay there for a few days. Before the duel, Dumbledore specially sent a message to him saying that he could not hurt Quirrell's life. Just for this one, the withered skull cannot be used. The TNT flash was too light for Quirrell and was far from enough to keep him in the hospital wing for a few more days. Fortunately, from the time he came to Hogwarts to now, the students and professors like him very much. So, Ender Crystal. With a tap of Keisen's wand, a purple cube floating in midair suddenly appeared, surrounded by white cube frames. The moment the Ender Crystal appeared, it quickly flew towards Quirrell. Bang! Quirrell was blown away and fell to the ground, not knowing whether he was alive or dead. The entire auditorium was silent for a moment, and then the next moment. Oh ho 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 ho. Chapter 38. Keisen walked down the high platform and came to Quirrell, who was lying on the ground. He confirmed that this old boy would probably lie in the hospital wing for 1 to 2 weeks before he looked back with confidence. As for the missing defense against the dark arts course, he believed that someone would be more than happy to take care of it. After returning to the office, Keisen took out a bottle of champagne from the cabinet and walked toward Hagrid's cabin. The next day, Hagrid left the hut early with a handful of red cloth strips, because it will be Christmas in a while, although I don't know why wizards celebrate this holiday. But Christmas trees are still needed. To the pine trees in the Forbidden Forest, the red strip of cloth in Hagrid's hand is like the king of Hell's army. If you are tied with a strip of cloth today, you will basically not be able to survive next year. What a miserable word. Unlike Hagrid, Keisen had no classes today and could leisurely return to the castle and his office, greeting all the little wizards he met on the way. Then he returned to the office and picked up the little wizards' roll call list and parchment to prepare gifts one by one. After everything was ready, all that was left was to wait. Wait until Christmas. Woohoo! Kesensis stood at Hogsmeade Station. It was his first time seeing the Hogwarts Express, and he was also curious about this performance art of cosplaying a Muggle train. After all, magic-driven trains theoretically do not need to emit smoke. He took the ticket Dumbledore had given him and stepped onto the train. After all, according to his old man, almost every young wizard has ridden the Hogwarts Express since it was invented, and he lost this experience because he did not enroll in school. So Dumbledore specially left a ticket for him to let him feel that feeling. Of course, it wasn't entirely an experience for him to get on the train. After all, he had already packed up all his belongings in the Muggle world and packed them up for Hogwarts. He also planned to spend the Christmas holidays directly at Hogwarts. This time I left school mainly for a home visit and also to return gifts for my Muggle friends. Because of Neville's character, Kesensis thought that his grandmother's character was too strong. He had wanted to write a letter to Neville's grandmother before, but because there were always things going on, and he didn't know what to do as soon as he picked up a pen. Right. In contrast, he prefers to sit face-to-face, with a cup of hot tea and snacks that are not sweet but fragrant, and demonstrate the charm of language crazily. Based on this, the home visit to the Longbottom family came into being. However, he did not sit in the same carriage with Neville, even if there were free seats in the carriage because Harry and Ron were staying at school for Christmas. After all, he was a professor, and sitting with Neville always made him feel uncomfortable. After all, a home visit is already very presumptuous. Time passed until the train stopped at the Muggle station, platform 9 and 3/4 of King's Cross Station. After getting off the train, Kesensis quickly saw the highly recognizable which that Professor McGonagall talked about. An old woman with a stern expression wearing an extremely complicated wizard robe and a large brown-green wizard hat seemed to have a good relationship with Professor McGonagall. After all, apart from her dressing style, this old woman is more sophisticated, while Professor McGonagall is more low-key. But their temperaments are so similar. Professor Heath, I am Augusta Longbottom, Neville's grandmother. He wrote me a box full of letters, all about you, thanking you for taking care of this poor child. Augusta also noticed Kesensis, who stood out among the little wizards, and walked over and said, Kesensis Heath, just call me whatever you want, Mrs. Longbottom. I'm here mainly because of Neville's character. Did that kid get you into trouble? No, no, no. Kesensis waved his hand quickly. No trouble, absolutely not. In fact, that child is too obedient and too honest. He doesn't even look like a Gryffindor. I see. This child's character has always been like this, too cowardly. I always thought he was a Hufflepuff, Augusta said in agreement. Kesensis nodded and was about to say something when he heard a thump of footsteps and Neville trotted over from a distance. Grandma, Professor Kesensis, would you mind coming to Longbottom's for a potluck? Augusta asked. Of course, just a casual meal. Augusta held Neville's little hand with his left hand and put his right hand on Kesensis' shoulder. The next moment, the three of them appeared on a small island. Kesensis looked at the quaint and magnificent manor not far away. If I were to decorate this... In an instant, Kesensis quickly expelled this inappropriate thought from his head. There are only 2 people in Longbottom Manor, plus an outsider like Kesensis. Of course, Kesensis didn't know exactly how many members of the Longbottom family there were now, and there was no need to ask. He came for a home visit, not to check the household registration. At least today, there are really only the 3 of them in the huge manor, if you ignore the house elves hiding in every corner. This also allowed Kesensis to have a more accurate judgment on Mrs. Longbottom's strength. How can we not be strong when we have such a huge manor? If we were not strong, we would have been wiped out by relatives who appeared out of nowhere. After all, the wizarding world says there is a ministry of magic, but how efficient they are is actually just like that. They catch those who perform magic, cook, and decorate in the Muggle world. But in the wizarding world, those who committed murder and arson were acting like dead people and began to pretend to be corpses. The 3 of them sat down in the living room first, and they were not counted as 3, because when Neville wanted to listen in, Augusta just gave him a look, and he obediently returned to his bedroom. Please, Professor Heath, what you just did is what I want to say, Mrs. Longbottom. This child has been out of breath under such strong pressure from you. There will also be some other problems. As a Gryffindor, man, he lost his courage because of your pressure. Kesensis showed the mentality and eloquence he had when negotiating with those ed parties when he first debuted in the decoration industry, and he had already decided to spit out the last bit of his saliva with his tongue. Unexpectedly, Augusta National did not rush to refute how good its education policy was like those wise parties, but nodded helplessly. Of course I know this, but to be honest,
It's not that I belittle Neville, but that he really can't do anything well.
Chapter 39. Then Kesin was forced to listen for nearly an hour about all the embarrassing things that happened to Neville from the time he was born to before he started school. In a sense, this is also complimentary. Why do they complement each other? Neville's talent is a little dull, so he caused dissatisfaction among the Longbottom family. In order to make Neville show his magical talent, the Longbottom family used various high-pressure plans. This high-pressure plan hurt Neville's heart, which was also a great harm to the wizard who performed magic against his will. In this way, Neville and the Longbottom family complemented each other, and in a sense, they hurt each other, making both groups suffer, and this still can't find any errors. The Longbottom family wanted the heir to show magical talent. That's right. Neville is just a little boy, so it's not his fault that he is dull. In fact, Neville can't be said to be dull, he just lacks confidence, and this is the point of his lack of confidence. Kesin reviewed the entire incident in detail and finally found the person mainly responsible: Voldemort and his minions. That's right, this is the person who is mainly responsible for Neville's problems at this moment. After figuring this out, Kesin suddenly became enlightened and escaped the trap of self-consumption. Soon dinner was prepared by the house elves and served on the table. Kesin took a look and was once again surprised at the strength of these old pure-blood families. In the past, these foods were enjoyed by all faculty and staff at Hogwarts, but today, only the three of them had food that was almost as much as the Hogwarts dinner. The meal was a great success, but Kesin still noticed that whenever Neville saw his grandmother, he would unconsciously shrink and show cowardice on his face. At the dinner table, he emphasized to Augusta how Neville had done at Hogwarts, how Neville, who was not suppressed by the old woman in front of him, had almost killed the heir of the Malfoy family with a wand. Of course, this has a little bit of artistic processing attributes. But this also let Mrs. Longbottom know that as long as she didn't suppress Neville, Neville could also be very good, at least in combat and herbology. I will do as you say, Professor Kesin. Encourage education. Mrs. Longbottom sent Kesin to the gate of the manor, and of course Neville followed behind her. The two of them obviously wanted to continue sending it out, to a place where the apparition restriction could not reach. It's fine here. In fact, we don't have to encourage education. Normal education is fine as long as it is not suppressed. As for normal education, to be honest, I think you can learn from the Weasley family, of course, the one at the Burrow.
Weasley,
Kesin explained. I'll find time to go to the Burrow. Well, not this Christmas. They seem to be going to look for their eldest or second son. Professor, are you really not going to stay here? Even for one day is fine, Neville said behind Mrs. Longbottom. I'm sorry, but to be honest, I'm still very busy this Christmas. I have a lot of work to do when I return to Hogwarts. The fourth-year enchantment table papers have also passed the review, and I have to find time to take them to pick up the papers. They deserve the credit. There are also plans for the renovation and expansion of my office, and Christmas gifts for all of you, which are ready but not yet packed with cards and mailed. Have you prepared a lot? Of course, besides yours and the professor's gifts, there are also my Muggle friends. After leaving school, I have to go back to my previous residence to receive their gifts. I'm really busy, Kesin explained. Oh well. Kesin and the two nodded, and then with a roaring sound, he disappeared directly, leaving only traces of purple light spots disappearing in place. Professor Kesin can get rid of the restriction of apparition? And that's not the magic of the portkey? Mrs. Longbottom murmured in surprise. I'm not surprised by what Professor Kesin does. He even sent Quirrell into the hospital wing with one move before. Kalina Quillo? That expert in black magic? Mrs. Longbottom said in a rare move. Is he very powerful? Quirrell? Very good.
Among the younger generation, at least he is better than those Aurors.
Mrs. Longbottom hugged Neville and returned to the manor. Returning to his house at 222 Baker Street, London, he looked at the stack of greeting cards in the mailbox and smiled helplessly. Soon, he got back a lot of Christmas gifts from the post office. I also gave them gifts one by one. Let me see, Mrs. Martha's. Why did she give it to me? Well, it's so pink. Peanuts gave him a bag of peanuts. Fortunately, I gave him peanuts as well. Sherlock's signature windbreaker. This guy is still so narcissistic. Kesin found the sewing box from the room and used a small piece of cloth to cover Sherlock's letters. Then he embroidered his name on the left neckline. Well, he is still so clever. Kesin, who put on a new windbreaker, looked left and right in front of the dressing mirror, and also looked at his neighbor's house, and there was no one there. Those two guys are always so busy. After replacing the gifts from his muggle friends, Kesin returned to the alchemy office in Hogwarts in the blink of an eye. Put all the gifts that you prepared in advance into the inbox. And he just walked towards the Owl House of Hogwarts with a small Enderbox ring. Unfortunately, the owls have very little rest in the days leading up to Christmas. The arrival of Kesin only exacerbated this cruel situation. The broomstick protective suit for Harry. This can be sent directly to his dormitory, huh? Neville's memory bracelet. Ron's new robe. Are the Weasleys so poor that they can't even buy new robes? Hermione's Alchemy Enlightenment book. If she takes my class in 3rd grade, I will definitely let her be the class representative. Angelina's broomstick cushion. Professor McGonagall's enchanted quill. She will like this. Severus. Is Slytherin afraid of water? He doesn't want to wash his hair. Fortunately, he has a friend like me. A hairdryer. I'm really a genius. Hagrid's gold beer mug. He always complains that the glass is too light and has no feel. I hope he won't dislike my gift for not being ingenious. Can't you fly? Kaizen was giving Hagrid a gift. After packing, he handed it to the owl, but the poor owl fluttered with the gift for a long time without flying. Chapter 40. Kaizen had no choice but to take out the enchanting table and give the owl box a rising buoyancy, allowing the poor owl to stagger away grabbing the gift. The last one belonged to Dumbledore. He had previously bought 2 pairs of brand new wool socks from the Muggle community and enchanted the enchanting table with a warming spell and packaged them directly to the owl so that he could send them to Dumbledore when the time came. One day later, Kesin climbed out of bed and skillfully opened his gifts. For example, Professor McGonagall gave him a Gryffindor lion brooch because Professor McGonagall noticed that Kesin really liked wearing it. Brooch. Snape was generous and gave him a small bottle of Felixir. The moment he took it in his hand, Kesin regretted it. He had never thought that Snape would give him such an expensive thing. Compared with that dry cleaning hair, the machine seems a bit unwieldy. The other people's gifts were all the same kinds of jewelry that Kaizen would usually wear, but the gifts given to him by Neville and Dumbledore made him feel a little fresh and new. Dumbledore sent a book about alchemy, very profound and profound. Neville, on the other hand, presented a set of dark red robes, which felt soft like water. The patterns on them flowed like lava, exuding a very comfortable temperature in winter. Apart from these, the most satisfying thing about this Christmas for Kesin is probably that Hagrid finally agreed to let him renovate Hagrid's hut after his persuasion. That day, he rushed out of the Hogwarts castle and moved Hagrid, his luggage, important belongings, and things of commemorative value out of Hagrid's hut in the blink of an eye. Hagrid, is there nothing important in this house that you think is important? Kaizen looked back at Hagrid excitedly. The latter looked at the various things piled around him and scratched his head. No more. Where's the dragon egg? Also there. That's no problem. The next moment Kesin started at 0 frame. An ender crystal flew quickly towards Hagrid's hut. Only a bang was heard, the hut disappeared, and only a big pit was left on the spot. Wow, I remember you weren't talking about decoration, Hagrid said with some embarrassment. Don't worry about the details. Tell me what kind of new house you want? Kesin asked, waving his hand. It doesn't need to be too big. Of course it can be bigger than the one I had before. It has to have a bedroom, a living room, and the most important thing is a kitchen. It must have a kitchen and a bathroom. I'd be very happy if it's possible. Of course the most important thing is to be cute. No problem. Kesin took out his wand and began to exit. Every time he waved the wand, the soil under his feet was struck by powerful magic and disappeared. Next came the foundation. Several oak logs were buried heavily in the soil, with grooves still remaining in them. After the weighing column was made, the method of adding magma and water was used directly. After the frame of the foundation was made, it was spruce planks began laying the floor. After doing all this, Kesin waved to Hagrid. Come over here, Hagrid, and see what space you need, so I can design it for you. Oh haha, really? First I want a fireplace. Can it be pink? Theoretically it's possible, but I won't do it for you. Oh, okay. Where's the door? Over there. Kesin pointed to the foundation facing north and south, leaning against a weighing column on the right. There will be a 3-meter-high door here, so you no longer have to bend down when entering the door. What should be after entering the door? Hagrid asked Kesin. At the entrance, there will be shoe racks, umbrella racks, clothes hangers, etc. Oh, can I get rid of it? It's possible, but I don't recommend it. It would be very strange. Kesin explained. Okay, what about after the entrance? Kesin was a little distrustful of himself because of Hagrid's series of questions. He answered in a strange tone. Maybe it's the living room. Don't you know this common sense? The castle is not as fancy as Kaysen, and I haven't been to other places. Okay, the entrance and living room are all in order, right? Does the living room need a fireplace? Of course, even if it's not pink. Kaysen built a fireplace with raw stones on the back of the foundation, placed magma blocks under the fireplace, lit the fire and blocked it with iron railings. How can I put firewood in that case? This flame will not go out, and there is this. Kaysen took out a stone button and placed it on the edge of the fireplace. Look at these things. If you press them once, the fire goes out. If you press them again, the fire will start burning again. It's amazing, Hagrid sighed. Kaysen placed a coffee table in front of the fireplace, a row of sofas around the coffee table, and a large sofa next to the fireplace, specially prepared for Hagrid. Afterwards, the kitchen and bathroom were all in order, until we reached the stairs and Hagrid's bedroom on the second floor. Although the MC block is not affected by the rules of physics, that is to say, in theory, it is no problem to place a thin wooden board in midair and put 10 Hagrids on the board. But for him, a top civil engineering student from the Department of Civil Engineering at the University of Manchester, this is still a bit, well, illogical. Although this logic is like Newton's coffin board in the MC world, it is basically equivalent to nothing. However, as a man with obsessive-compulsive disorder and a bit of perfectionism, Kaysen feels uncomfortable in his heart and cannot do it. So it's a pity that he didn't use floor tiles and frames, but just squares. This also caused some minor problems. For example, the floor on the second floor of Hagrid's new home was 1 meter thick. In order to balance this meter, the height of the first floor must be increased so that it does not look so inconsistent. Similarly, the height of the second floor must also be increased and the attic. Kaysen didn't build an attic for Hagrid's house, and the roof was tightly sealed. Standing in Hagrid's bedroom, Kaysen thought about it and broke the window directly, making a protruding balcony, which could be used as an awning for the door downstairs. Finally, add load-bearing columns to the awning. Perfect. So perfect. Elegant. So elegant. Kaysen stood in front of the brand new Hagrid's cabin, took a few steps back involuntarily, and sighed. Then he found Hagrid walking and carrying his dusty belongings. It's not so elegant in a moment, isn't it? Dumbledore didn't know when he appeared behind Kaysen and said with a smile. Kaysen shrugged. A happy stay is the most important thing. Chapter 41. After the entire Hagrid cabin was renovated, or rather rebuilt, Kaysen returned to the life of Shinyu again. The praise I had given Neville at Longbottom Manor was actually not a boast. I had indeed helped Hagrid expand the house and wrapped gifts for his students. He did return gifts to his friends in the Muggle world, so theoretically he did not deceive him. Well, nothing wrong. The Christmas vacation passed quickly, and even Kaysen hadn't had a good rest yet, although he rested conservatively for 4 days out of 7 days a week. In short, the little wizards returned to Hogwarts on the whining little train, while Kaysen sat in Professor McGonagall's office. At this time, Professor McGonagall was holding a form in his hand. It was Kaysen who wanted to take the 4th grade wizards to apply for school leave from the European Alchemy Exchange Association. When I applied to leave school in 7th grade, Professor McGonagall approved it almost instantly, but when it came to 4th grade, Professor McGonagall looked at the form and then at Kaysen. He looked at the form and then at Kaysen. Actually, there is no need for you to hand over your achievements to these little wizards and let them take away the honor that belongs to you in vain. There is no need for you to go to this extent. You are just a professor, not their father. These are all. It's not your responsibility. Kaysen looked at Professor McGonagall with a strange look, because Professor McGonagall looked at him with an equally weird look. He couldn't put it into words, but he just felt that there was something, feeling distressed, or, well, helpless, but also a little bit relieved. Kaysen didn't know what strange thing Professor McGonagall had in mind. He only knew that the form in front of him must be successfully approved by Professor McGonagall today. Then he informed them of this important news today, and tomorrow he will personally instruct the young wizards on how to dress. After all, they are not 7th graders, and 4th graders are still immature little cubs in his eyes. There are even quite a few who are still playing with mud and drawing stick figures on parchment. Let them dress themselves up, not to mention making themselves an elegant gentleman. He was afraid that their collars still had pumpkin juice accidentally smeared on them during the morning meal. This is all very possible. I still don't agree with your approach. I know you want to add a highlight to their resume, but after all, it is forcing you to take advantage of it. It is not their own achievement. In other words, it is unfair to you. That's not fair, Professor McGonagall said at last. I think it's okay. I handed the finished product to them and asked them to write it into a paper based on the analysis principles of the finished product. This can be regarded as doing me a favor, not taking advantage of me. After all, I am really too lazy to write those papers. Kesensis shrugged his shoulders and said indifferently. Professor McGonagall nodded. I really hope you were taught by me, and signed his name on the form handed over by Kesensis. I will take this sentence as your compliment to me. Kesensis picked up the form and left Professor McGonagall's office very excitedly, walking nonstop towards his alchemy classroom. After arriving in the classroom, he walked onto the podium and saw the lifeless little wizards under the podium. It's a weird atmosphere. Can anyone tell me what happened? Cedric, the fourth-year alchemy class representative he appointed, took out a copy of the Daily Prophet from his pocket. He then placed it on the podium in full view of the class of little wizards. What's the matter? Kesensis picked up the newspaper and read it, but he was suddenly disappointed. I thought they could give me some new work, but this is it? Kesensis pointed at the news in the newspaper and complained. The information in it was easy to understand. It simply said that the old and foolish Dumbledore forced the new alchemy professor to gain face for his Hogwarts students. His results were divided and given to the little wizards. Normally, this kind of thing would involve an unscrupulous professor turning into an academic thief and stealing the students' achievements. But this time it was really reversed. The unscrupulous principal and the students stole the poor professor's achievements together. Kesensis looked at the little wizards in the audience. Seriously, what do you think this newspaper is? What is its use? Anyone with a discerning eye can see that it is not about me, not you, but the criticism of Dumbledore by someone with a heart. I can understand that Gryffindor and Hufflepuff can't see it, but Ravenclaw and St. Leetland, why do you look like you agree with the bullshit in this newspaper? When the little Slytherin wizards and Ravenclaw wizards in the audience heard what Kesensis said about them, out of some strange mood, they puffed up their chests proudly at the same time. Kesensis looked at the podium and was stunned for a while. Why did the students he taught have a strange, uneducated sense of beauty? The little wizards under the podium also reacted, and their chests were no longer proud. Okay, this is all a matter between Dumbledore and the Ministry of Magic. There is no need for me to argue. There is no class today. The main purpose of calling you here is to send a notice. Your previous paper on the enchantment table has passed the review of the European Link. Today, clean yourself up tonight and put on the robe you selected for me to review tomorrow. We'll set off directly this weekend, okay? The little wizards all shook their heads simultaneously. No problem, then let's go. I won't take up your spare time. Kesensis left the classroom directly after saying that, not caring about the little wizard in the classroom. At this time, he had more important things to do. On the way back to the office, Kesensis bumped into Dumbledore. Stare. Why are you looking at me like that? Dumbledore tilted his head and asked with some confusion. Weren't you spread rumors by that unscrupulous reporter? Why are you still wandering here slowly? Kesensis asked. Oh, what do you mean by that? It's natural not to listen to gossip all day long. I don't have that much energy to care about those innocuous little things. Are you so generous? What if? Stare? Oh, well, after all, I'm a famous wizard who has been famous for a long time. A single move can affect the whole body, so if I encounter this kind of thing, I can only knock out my teeth and swallow it in my stomach, Dumbledore said frankly. Oh, how pathetic. The white-bearded old helper showed a smile and gently held Kesensis' shoulders. That's what I've been waiting for. Chapter 42. I'm sorry, I drank too much last night and my logic is not clear. Today I found that Rita Skeeter and Kesensis have no conflict in theory. Kesensis just went up and turned into a real brother. That reason is too far-fetched, so I changed it. For this reason, I changed about 300 words in Chapter 41. You can go back and continue the story. Kesensis' mouth twitched. I shouldn't have asked you that question. Actually, Dumbledore, you are a very generous person in my heart. You know, you are like Mount Everest in my mind. As tall as the Alps, as sweet as the mountains. Dumbledore patted Kesensis on the shoulder affectionately and said, That's right, Kesensis. You are the same. In my heart, you are as warm as the sun, shining selflessly on everything in Hogwarts, caring for students and being kind to them. Professor Unity and also... Wait. Kesensis gestured for a pause with his hand. No matter what you say, I won't go. Didn't you want to convert your office into a separate tower? Do you agree? Dumbledore put his hands behind his back and looked up at the ceiling at a 45-degree angle. If something happened to Rita Skeeter, like some thugs broke into her house and beat her up, I need her address. What address? Dumbledore started playing dumb from the very beginning. Okay. Kaysen rolled his eyes and decided to ask someone else. Dumbledore then gave that sinister smile that was unique to him. You offended the principal, and you still want to run away? Humph. I was cyberbullied by that reporter for such a long time. First, I was implicated in the incident and the whole body was affected. I really couldn't be honest offline. Second, the professors at Hogwarts and his friends outside of Hogwarts all knew what kind of person he was, and were too lazy to bother with his childish revenge plan. Now, Kaysen is finally here. He is powerful, simple-minded, and most importantly, he doesn't understand himself. Haha. Boom boom boom. Come in. Professor McGonagall looked at Kaysen in confusion until she saw the newspaper in Kaysen's hand and suddenly realized what was going on. You don't need to show up for this kind of thing. Dumbledore has already gone to the Ministry of Magic to negotiate with Fudge and Skeeter. I believe there will be a result soon. What did he negotiate? He was just chatting with me in the corridor. Huh. Did he ask us to find Skeeter? No, absolutely not. Stare. Well, Dumbledore promised me that he could convert my office into a separate tower, Kaysen confessed. Well, there really is no one who can refuse. How do you want to solve it? Beat her up offline? I knew it. Professor McGonagall was speechless. I need her home address. After Kaysen finished speaking, he looked at Professor McGonagall expectantly, which made her feel butterflies in her heart. But she soon adjusted her mood and pursed her lips. Theoretically, I shouldn't do this, and I really don't know where she lives. What about actually? You can actually write a letter to Rita Skeeter. These owls have been cast with name magic. When the recipient's address cannot be found, the owls will follow the instructions of the name magic to find her home. Also, this kind of name magic is only available to public owls in the owl shed. Oh, I understand. Kaysen returned to the office and took out a piece of parchment. After thinking for a long time, he wrote on it, "Reel you in 3 seconds," then took out an ender pearl and set up a small mechanism. As long as the envelope was opened, the ender pearls will break. Hum. After sending the public owl to deliver the letter, Kaysen hugged his shoulders and sulked in the office until evening, when he felt it was almost time and picked up a baseball bat from the corner of the office. This is a big baby made by the Weasley brothers before. Every time they hit someone, it will explode, hit and explode, and hit and explode. I thought this thing was dangerous at first, so I confiscated it, but I didn't expect that I would actually use it today. On the other side, Rita Skeeter wrote a short essay in the Daily Prophet for a day, and when she got home, she took it out of the mailbox. But one of the letters looked a little strange to her. There was a ball-shaped thing inside. After a long silence, she skillfully moved a huge explosion-proof barrel from the corner. It looked like it could be as tall as a person, and there was a small piece of explosion-proof inlaid on it. Pieces of glass. Use magic to control the letter and put it in. After tearing open the envelope, Kaysen appeared in the explosion-proof barrel, and Rita Skeeter walked over with a smile on her face and arms on her shoulders. She took off her lace gloves and slapped them twice on the explosion-proof glass of the explosion-proof barrel. Do you think I wouldn't expect someone to come to my door? With such a dirty reverse door key? You thought. Do you think I can't get out? Kaysen, who was standing inside the explosion-proof barrel, just lightly knocked on the inner wall of the explosion-proof barrel. With 2 bangs, a 2x1 hole was knocked out. He waved the baseball bat in his hand, making a crackling sound. Bang! After Kaysen's friendly exchange, Rita Skeeter was dragged out of the house with a bruised nose and face. A diamond shovel appeared in Kaysen's hand, and she dragged her to a grove not far away and started digging a hole. Not long after, a 2x1x2 deep pit was dug by Kaysen. Dear Ms. Reporter, I believe you will like this new home. Kaysen grabbed Rita Skeeter's robe, threw it directly in, and then began to fill the soil. The soil was extremely loose and breathable, and with the wizard's powerful vitality, she would be able to crawl out on her own when she woke up tomorrow morning. Of course, as long as it doesn't rain, it's fine, but Christmas is over. How can we make it rain for her? That's a joke. He patted the dust on his hands and was about to leave Sir Shiran until he returned to Hogwarts and just arrived at Dumbledore's principal's office, intending to tell him that he had successfully made Rita Skeeter real. Then he saw it suddenly pouring rain outside the window. It's the end of December. Where does the rain come from in England? Kaysen suddenly let out a sharp blast, and a roar disappeared along with purple spots of light. After all, that Rita Skeeter could only say a few words of praise in the newspaper. Although she was not a good person, she was really not worthy of death. Chapter 43. Wow, I was wrong. I'll never get high in the newspaper again, seriously? Rita Skeeter, who was almost suffocated by the mud in the rain, lay in the mud and cried and howled, while Kason put away the shovel and left the quiet woods in the blink of an eye. Anyway, Skeeter didn't see his face clearly when his head was blown off with a baseball bat, so he probably wouldn't report it to the Ministry of Magic. Probably. Back at Hogwarts, Kason shook out his raincoat, came to Dumbledore's office, and placed the office expansion application form he had prepared on Dumbledore's desk. That Rita Skeeter? At least she should be a lot quieter recently.
Yes.
Dumbledore nodded and signed his name on the form. Do you need me to find a construction team for you? No, I can do it myself, Kaizen said. By the way, the building you expand needs to conform to the style of Hogwarts, the kind with black brick and stone walls. Don't worry, I'm professional. This is best. After returning to his office, Kason hummed a song, took out the parchment, and began to design his new office. Maybe. Dong dong dong. Please come in. Professor? Your office? Neville walked in first, followed by Harry and the others. Kason put away the parchment on which he had just drawn a sketch and took out the teapot. Neville was wearing the memory bracelet he had given him, and Ron, who had been sitting on the sofa early and showing off snacks in his mouth, also put on his new robe. But Neville on the other side looked at Kason with a feeling of aggrievedness. First of all, the wizard robe he gave away was not worn by Professor Kason, and he said at Longbottom Manor that he wanted to expand his office. Well, at least he didn't see the office expand even 1 square meter. An emotion called grievance suddenly choked his throat. Neville, what are you thinking about? Your little face is wrinkled together. Professor, didn't you say you were going to expand your office during the summer vacation? Unfortunately, I have a bit of procrastination and am still in the sketching stage. Kaizen looked at the sensitive little wizard in front of him and quickly took out his design sketch and put it on his desk. Then the new robe I gave. I just went out and it was still raining outside. You can't let me get that new robe dirty, can you? Kason showed his language skills for a while before finally convincing Neville that he didn't dislike the robes he sent, nor did he want to stay at Longbottom Manor for one night. Of course, the latter really doesn't like sleeping in territory that doesn't belong to him. It always feels weird, but that can't be said. What if Neville drops the little pearl? It's not just about coaxing yourself. Tell me, what's going on with you 4 little guys? Kaizen asked. Professor, do you know Nicholas Flamel? Hermione asked. Nicholas Flamel? I remember that the textbook I gave you didn't have this name. Kason scratched his head. Indeed, the textbook he gave to Hermione was just an Enlightenment textbook. There are only rough theories and a few interesting alchemy experiments in it. It's not yet time for the giant Buddha of Nicoleem to appear. I didn't read it in that book. Hermione shook her head. I should finish the question in one breath next time. Where did you see this name? Kason sighed. The 4 little ones just looked at each other and said, How did you find out about this from Hagrid? Hagrid. Oh, by the way, you went to Hagrid's new home? How was it? Do you know who built that house for him? Never mind. You probably can't guess. It's me. I didn't build Hogwarts. The professor used to be a very good whole house customization practitioner. That is, decoration. Professor, please don't change the subject. Hermione sighed. She looked at the professor in front of her who was very unfamiliar with changing the subject. She didn't know why, but she suddenly felt like he was an 11-year-old first-year wizard. And in her opinion, Professor Kason's ability to change the topic and lie was not as good as Harry's ability to deceive Professor McGonagall. I really finished the paper. I just forgot to bring it with me. Well, Nicoleem is a very powerful alchemist. He made the only magic stone in the world. He also used this magic stone to make the elixir of immortality. It is said that he has lived for more than 600 years. Nearly 700 years. Don't you all collect chocolate frog cards? Kason leaned on the chair and crossed his hands on his stomach, saying a little awkwardly, In that case, the one hidden under the trapdoor should be the so-called Philosopher's Stone. Hermione said seriously, making Kason want to laugh. How should he politely tell them that the so-called magic stone is actually a red stone, and he also gave them one as a gift? But there are more important things than this small idea. For example, are you still after the trapdoor? Or are you still after Quirrell? Forehead. Then what? Professor, do you have black tea here? Okay, where did you find it? Kason asked with a sigh of relief. When we were having tea with Hagrid, we accidentally let it slip that Quirrell was a dark wizard. Then Hagrid didn't believe it. So Harry took the blame and said that Quirrell was not only a dark wizard, but also wanted to steal for the magic stone in the hallway. Then Hagrid talked a lot and drove us out in a panic. When he was in a panic, he also talked about Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel's plan, and then, ahem, Nicholas Flamel. Hermione Min shrugged and said speechlessly. Hagrid then, now that you know what's hidden there, do you have any other plans? Kaizen sighed. What do you do with our plan? Listen to your plans, then make corresponding plans and reversely destroy your plans. Is that right? Hermione said with a somewhat broken expression. Then will you say it? The four little ones looked at each other and shook their heads simultaneously. Won't. The four little ones looked at each other again, wondering what they were whispering in private, and finally stood up simultaneously. Goodbye, Professor Kesen. Kasen's mouth twitched as he watched them leave the office one after another. Gryffindor, Gryffindor. Chapter 44. After sending the four little ones away, Kesen felt safe. After that, at least for the time being, he only had to take the fourth-grade wizard to receive the award. Time blinked and came to this weekend. When he woke up in the morning, he noticed a set of door keys beside his bed, along with a letter from the European Alchemy Exchange Association. The language of this letter is more intimate than the last one, which shows that the big guys in the Exchange Association also like Kesen, who spreads papers like coins. Until evening, Kesen once again asked the little wizards to stand in a row in front of him, and he personally reviewed the appearance of the little wizards. Soon, Kesen came to the banquet hall of the Ministry of Magic again. He first looked around at the reporters present. Very well, Rita Skeeter was not present. In other words, since she was hit by her own box, the only thing that appeared in the public eye was a brief statement in the Daily Prophet. She said she was on leave indefinitely. That's great. I dislike her very much, really, Kesen said, leaning on a huge Roman weighing column and Ollivander beside him. Well, as the owner of the only stick-making family in England, it's strange that he doesn't appear here. Yes, by the way, in addition to the award ceremony today, there is also your investiture ceremony. We have a tacit understanding not to reveal it to you. This is a surprise, Ollivander said with a smile. Does this mean I can add another title to my list? No, add two more. One is for the recipient of the Order of Hermes. Hermes, you know, is said to be the founder of alchemy and the pinnacle of honor in the alchemy world. The other is for the Order of Merlin, but I didn't ask in detail. After all, ever since a Blake exchanged money for a first-class medal, the value of the Merlin Order has plummeted. Some people are even ashamed of receiving the Order of Merlin. Of course, this is not entirely Black's fault. A larger part should be blamed on the Ministry of Magic. Ollivander slowly explained the ins and outs to Kesen. I understand. Soon, as a brief and non-verbose award ceremony ended, Kesen was pushed to the high platform by Ollivander. You know, I'm not good with words. Then don't talk. Not many people who practice alchemy can talk. That's right. Early the next morning, Kaizen wore the dark red wizard robe that Neville gave him. The robe was so thin and soft that it looked like he was not wearing anything. Of course, I was talking about the feeling, not what it seems. The medal of Hermes is pinned on his chest. There is no fixed color on it. On the contrary, at first glance, it looks like slowly flowing hemp, shining with a low-key light. Fixed brooch +1, he walked out of the office in a sultry manner and walked towards the classroom. Today's class is for the 3rd grade. He has already taught them the basics of alchemy in general, and it's time to give them some topics, such as how to use basic alchemy to create a totem of immortality. Of course, he is definitely not that perverted. It is just a compliment. In the classroom, Kesen stood on the podium. Now, you have understood the basic rules of alchemy, so I came to find a short topic for you. Don't worry, this topic is very simple. As he spoke, Kesen clapped his hands, and a luminous blue square suddenly appeared on the podium. Under the ground was an obsidian base, with a blue luminous body in the center, and the outside was wrapped in a layer of crystal. Let you see the magic of this big guy. He waved his hands towards the little wizards, and the students below immediately understood. They all hugged their desks, kicked their chairs, and moved to the edge of the classroom. An iron block also appeared in Kesen's hand, and soon a small iron pyramid appeared in the center of the classroom. He placed the beacon on it, and took out an emerald and smashed it into it. In an instant, the beacon released a milky white beam of light. Did you feel any power? The little wizards were all confused, and Kaizen touched his chin in embarrassment. You can try jumping. Just do what you say, such as the Weasley twins. The two squatted down and jumped up with all their strength, and then their heads came into close contact with the ceiling. Wait, where did I put that picture? Oh, I found it. This is it. A little fuzzy. Well, thank you, Mr. Weasley, for the demonstration for us. So this thing, I named it the beacon, can provide people with an increase within a certain range, such as allowing you to jump higher and run faster. Of course, there are other more powerful effects, such as restoring your magic power more quickly, making your spells more powerful, and making your lives more tenacious. After Kesensis finished speaking, one of the Weasley twins raised his hand. Please tell me. Then why doesn't the professor change it to a boosting effect? Because that requires a more precious base, such as a gold block, a diamond block, an emerald block, an alloy block, etc., but I must consider the load-bearing capacity of Hogwarts. You may very much hope that my alchemy creation will fall from here and kill Professor Snape, who is in class downstairs. Ha 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 ha. The classroom was filled with a happy atmosphere for a while, but I don't think it's necessary. Even though Snape always looks like he's crying, he really can't die. Oh. It was a strange sound of disappointment. Well, the Weasley twins were the loudest disappointed. Let me explain to you the structure of this object first. You can use the remaining half of the semester to write a theory paper for me. As for the paper grade, I will directly add it to your final grade. Of course, this thing is very complicated. I don't think you can thoroughly study this guy in half a semester. As long as the final paper is meaningful, I will give you points. Finally, plagiarism is prohibited. Believe me, I will check all papers carefully. Of course, if you are of the same mind, like the Weasley twins, I will call you to my office and let you talk to me about your ideas. Now close the textbooks and come closer. I will give you a closer look at the internal structure of this beacon, Kesensis said, and suddenly took out a manuscript in his hand. Wait a minute, Professor. Isn't this too violent? One of the little wizards asked. Is it violent? It's okay, Clang. Chapter 45. Kesensis and the little wizards left the alchemy classroom in disgrace. Although the process was somewhat tortuous, at least they all saw the nether star in the beacon. Before leaving the classroom, he gave each of the little wizards a small beacon and cast a spell on it. It would only be effective if they used it themselves. If given to others, the beacon would petrify and become useless. Stone. This can be regarded as a small gift for them. It can be used as a small pendant to increase one's own strength. In the evening, Kesensis, who had been cleansed again, came to the auditorium. Seeing that Quirrell's seat was still empty, he made a comfortable nasal noise. Villager voice. After finishing the meal, Kesensis did not return to the office immediately. Instead, he followed Hagrid decisively under Hagrid's leering gaze and what he thought was cautiousness, but in reality he was opening and closing widely. I guess you found some good wine, Kesensis said. It's not good wine, but it's better than fine wine. You'll know when you get there. Arriving at the brand new Hagrid's hut, it has become very rich and full of life under Hagrid's redashed decoration. Although it doesn't quite match the original style of the cabin, as the saying goes, happiness is the most important thing. After the two entered the hut, they sat down on the sofa next to the fireplace. Only then did Kesensis know what Hagrid had called him to do. Is your dragon egg almost out of its shell? Forgive me for not knowing anything about magical animals. Almost. This is the first time I have witnessed the birth of such a wonderful little life. Hagrid wanted to say something else, but was interrupted by an untimely knock on the door. After opening the door, there were 4 familiar people as Hagrid expected. Hello, Hagrid. Well, hello, but I want to say something in advance. I hope you are not here today to convince me that Quirrell is a dark wizard, Hagrid said, while welcoming the little wizards in. No. We are here to apologize because I yelled last time, Harry said with some embarrassment. You don't have to be like this. Really, I would have forgotten it if you didn't remind me. It's not a big deal. Hagrid waved his hand. After a few people came to the living room and sat on the small sofa surrounding the fireplace, they saw another person sitting here. Hello, I'm still guessing how long it will take you to notice someone sitting here. But it's not bad. Your reaction is very fast, Kesensis said with a smile. It's probably because the contrast between the clothes you're wearing and the sofa is too obvious, Ron complained. I can't help it. Hagrid loves pink sofas. Poof. Don't laugh. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Oh yes, we didn't laugh. We just think of happy things. What happy thing? Hagrid asked. Once upon a time, there was a giant, and then he, ha 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 ha. Kesensis and Hagrid looked at each other, both seeing helplessness in each other's eyes. After the 4 little ones had finished laughing, Hagrid also brought out a plate of rock cake from the kitchen. Kesensis picked up a piece, then picked up the milk that was heated on the edge of the fireplace, violently broke the rock cake into pieces and tossed in hot milk. This is the way he discovered to eat it. The rock cake soaked in milk is, To be honest, surprisingly delicious. After all, Hagrid's biscuits have no other shortcomings except for the higher heat, and he is not willing to add ingredients. The four little ones saw Kason eating like this, picked up a glass of milk and put it on the fireplace, and then, "Is this a dragon egg?" Ron asked with a dull look on his face. "Oh, yes, keep it secret for me." "This is a secret among the six of us," Hagrid said with a smile. Of course, we will keep it a secret." Harry, Neville, and Ron all nodded. But Hermione still remained rational. "But Hagrid, where are you going to keep this giant dragon? I seem to have read in a book that a 3-month-old dragon can be sacrificed with an elephant's tusks." For a moment, the air in the entire cabin became quiet. Hermione looked at Professor Kaysen again. After all, in her eyes, Professor Kaysen was the most upright and reliable person in the room. Then Kaysen looked at everyone with a blank look on his face. "What are you looking at me for? I have never seen a fire dragon before. I thought the largest one would be as big as an elephant, or like a 3-headed dog." Hermione rolled her eyes helplessly. "Oh my God, perhaps it can be kept in the Forbidden Forest?" Mr. Hagrid muttered. "Of course, if you are not afraid that this giant dragon will eat all life in the Forbidden Forest to extinction, it will soon extend its claws to Hogwarts on the day it eats extinction," Hermione complained. "Isn't this okay, Kaysen? Is there any spell that can make him smaller?" "The dragon's magic resistance can perfectly defend against curses. Otherwise, it wouldn't be made into dragon skin gloves." Hermione killed 3 times in a row, almost killing Hagrid's little pearl. "Forget it, Hagrid, even if you can't own a giant dragon forever. At least this dragon is about to break out of its shell. You have witnessed the birth of such a life. Your life and the life of the dragon are at this moment. If we have been together, even if we are separated in the future, at least you have experienced it, and you are already much luckier than most people." Kaizen patted Hagrid's shoulder and comforted him. Then just like that, it was okay not to be comforted. But as soon as he was comforted, Hagrid's little pearl completely fell off. A hybrid giant just hugged Kaysen, and his head, which was bigger than his chest, burrowed into his chest and started crying. "Neville, I can only say that I'm glad I'm not wearing your robe today." Neville looked at Kaizen, who looked hopeless, and then at Hagrid, who was crying nonstop, and nodded in agreement. Snap! There's someone outside. Harry suddenly became alert. "It's not curfew time yet," Kaysen said helplessly. "I'll open the door and take a look." Hagrid wiped his tears and stood up, leaving only a messy figure behind. Not long after, another little wizard was brought in by Hagrid. It would have been better if he didn't bring him with him, but when he was brought in, the whole living room almost exploded. "Draco Malfoy." Malfoy curled his lips and hugged his shoulders and snorted. "Is there any problem? What kind of forbidden area is this?" As he spoke, he also looked at the people in the room. Look at Hagrid, the big giant. Looking at Harry, he couldn't carry the person clearly. Looking at Neville, he was a fool who was not much better than a squib. Although he had accidentally missed a move before, it was just because he was careless and didn't dodge. Look at Ron, poor guy. Looking at Hermione, well, too lazy to look. Looking at Professor Kaysen, Draco looked at Kaysen, especially his tear-stained wizard robe, with a trace of pity in his eyes. Poor Professor Kaysen. Chapter 46. Poor Professor Kaysen. Draco looked at Kaysen with a strange, compassionate look that shouldn't appear on his face, making the latter feel a strange feeling. Never in his life had he wanted to learn the cleansing charm more than he did now. Under this strange gaze, he quietly took off his wizard robe, revealing the black shirt underneath. "Malfoy, what are you doing here?" Others didn't have a good look on Malfoy. "Ahem." Kaizen suddenly coughed and looked over. "Harry, strictly speaking, you shouldn't say this, because this is Hagrid's home." Hagrid shrugged. "I have no objection. I welcome all little wizards to be my guests." "You're not a bad person, big guy," Draco said with rare courtesy. "All right." The four of Harry pinched their noses and moved the sofa under themselves to make a place for Draco. "You haven't answered my question yet. I came back from the Quidditch pitch. I heard what you said about the fire dragon, so I came over to take a look. Then I didn't see the fire dragon, but I did see it. You cried very ugly, big guy." Hagrid wiped the remaining tears from his eyes with some embarrassment. "You can call me Hagrid." "Okay, Hagrid. Well, that's it. I was attracted by the fire dragon at first, but I didn't." There was a long silence, and then he said in a somewhat off-key tone, "Is this a dragon egg?" "Yes, and it should be about to break out of its shell." Hagrid sat on the sofa and looked at the dragon egg in the fireplace with joy. What are you planning on? Neville's tone was equally stiff. Don't I like it? As soon as Draco finished speaking, the dragon egg in the fireplace trembled. Hagrid looked at the dragon egg and looked at Kason at a loss. Should I put out the fire? Will it hurt this little kid? Guy. And Kason knows nothing about dragons. Finally, Draco finally spoke. The fire can be put out now. Everyone looked at him, and Draco rolled his eyes. Why are you looking at me? This dragon egg looks like a Norwegian ridgeback. It is best not to have fire when the Norwegian ridgeback breaks its shell. Of course, it's not impossible if there is a fire, but it's best to put out the fire. Seabed nodded, pressed the button, and the flame in the fireplace instantly extinguished, revealing 2 magma blocks. Only then did Draco notice that the fireplace didn't even have any fuel. After all, among the few people in this hut, Hagrid, Harry, and Hermione only knew a little about alchemy. Ron was from a poor family and had no contact with the chain. Gold is the chain gold of his twin brother and his father. In Neville's family, I have never heard of anyone who is good at alchemy, and they have gradually withdrawn from the core of the magic world in recent years. Draco glanced at Kason emphatically. This alchemist, who had been educated as an apprentice since childhood, could be said to have the least idea of his own alchemy. For example, the precious alchemist object became a fireplace switch, and other alchemists could immerse themselves in it. The results were distributed to the little wizards, and there was always a passive Versailles. It can be said that among the 7 people in this room, he is the only one who knows the goods. Professor Kason, do you still accept whole house customization? He asked boldly. After all, he has already prepared the professor to spit out the language of minus 273.15 degrees at 36 degrees, such as 6-digit gold galleons and so on. Kason's answer made the corners of his mouth twitch. I don't have any other customization ideas for the moment, because before that I want to renovate Hogwarts. It's a pity that Dumbledore won't let me use explosives, so I can only design it bit by bit. Okay. Click. The sound of an eggshell breaking interrupted the conversation that was about to start again in the room, and everyone's eyes turned to the egg standing on the obsidian table. A crack had already opened on it, and soon the crack became bigger and bigger, and finally an ugly faucet came out of it. Kason, Hagrid, and Draco were all attracted to this little ugly dragon head. The 4 of them, Harry, were huddled together and murmuring quietly. What should I do? I remember that raising dragons is prohibited at Hogwarts. Hermione whispered. Should we remind Hagrid? Neville asked. No, Malfoy is here. If he thinks about this, he will definitely use it to blackmail us. Ron said decisively. Then what should we do? Stand still? Even if he looks back, he will think of it. Ron said. Do you know that everything is forgotten? Hermione said suddenly. Neville understood, and his hand began to dishonestly touch a piece of hard rock cake on the plate, and he immediately planned to show off a wave of physics and forget about it. Can't we just ask Professor Kason to help seal the deal? And Neville, can you put down that rock cake? This isn't forgetfulness, it's Avada's Kedavra. Huh. Lee whispered. Is this okay? Neville put down the rock cake. It should be okay. I think Professor Kason and Dumbledore have a good relationship. A few people were about to continue their plan, but were interrupted by Draco. What are you mumbling about? Nothing. Draco curled his lips and looked at Hagrid again. Big guy, how are you going to place it? As far as I know, the Norwegian ridgeback can destroy this house in less than a month. I'll ask Dumbledore to help me find a dragon breeding farm and send him there. That's it. My family is quite big. I'm talking about the dragon breeding farm. I can contact Charlie. He works at the dragon breeding farm. The 2 said simultaneously. The air was filled with the invisible smell of gunpowder. Hagrid also felt this strange atmosphere. Just when he was about to look at Kason, the latter looked at the watch on his wrist first. Okay, little wizards, it's already the curfew time before you know it. If you don't want to be caught by Filch, leave now. I'll see you off. The 2 men stopped looking at each other, and each of them snorted and stood up. After leaving Hagrid's hut, Kason released 3 fluorescent stones around himself and returned to the castle with the 5 young wizards. It was not until the 6 of them were almost at the door of the Slytherin lounge that he heard a sudden voice behind him. There was a commotion. Neville and Ron took out their wands and were ready to give Draco a real beating and get points deducted, while Harry and Hermione were still confused and didn't know what was going on. And Kason, he didn't know what happened either. Neville noticed Kason's doubts and quickly explained. Malfoy said Hermione is a mudblood. Chapter 47. Kason didn't say anything, just silent, and the air in the corridor became quiet. Draco somehow felt a strange pressure and swallowed hard. What does mudblood mean? Harry and Hermione looked at each other. Although both of them knew that this was not a good word, they still couldn't understand the black language that belonged only to wizards. In short, these are very, very vicious words aimed at muggle-born wizards, Ron explained. This explanation was not only explained clearly to Harry and Hermione, but also Kaizen understood it. It sounded like a personal attack combined with blood discrimination. Well, he couldn't solve it by himself. Because although he knew that the word was not a good word, he still did not understand the severity of it, whether he should be deducted points, confined, or dragged out to be humanely destroyed. I can't control the speed of these, so I can only ask the old wizards for help. Although Snape is not entirely too old compared to Professor McGonagall, I'm going to call Professor McGonagall and Professor Snape over now. Do you have any objections? Draco shrank in fear when he heard Snape's name, but remained silent and began to cold-blooded everyone. The four little wizards of Gryffindor stared at Draco with vicious eyes, but they had no objections. You go to my office first, and I'll call Professor McGonagall and the others. After Kason finished speaking, he disappeared directly from the spot, leaving only wisps of purple light spots. Isn't it true that you can't disapparate at Hogwarts? Draco said in confusion when he saw Kason disappear suddenly. Humph, don't ask if you shouldn't ask, Neville said coldly. Soon, the sleepy Professor McGonagall and Snape, who was brewing a potion in the office, were called over from their respective offices by Kason, and the three of them walked into the alchemy office. 5 little wizards stood in 2 waves on both sides of the coffee table. Can you tell me what happened now? Snape asked. Now that the deans of your college are here, let's talk about the process. Ron was the first to look at Professor McGonagall. In the evening, when we came back from Hagrid's hut with Professor Kason, Malfoy and Hermione kept quarreling, and then Malfoy suddenly called Hermione a mudblood. The moment the words mudblood came out of Ron's mouth, Kaizen felt that the office was somehow colder. He had to move slowly to the edge of the fireplace and pressed a skull on it. A blazing flame burst into flames in an instant. Before the livid-faced Professor McGonagall could retaliate, Snape looked at Draco with a gloomy look. Draco, Malfoy, is that so? Draco swallowed and avoided looking into Snape's eyes. Seeing Malfoy's look, Snape understood and immediately said, because of Draco Malfoy, Slytherin will deduct 20 points. He needs another confinement to develop his memory, Professor McGonagall added. I don't have time during this period, do you? Snape said. The two looked at each other, and suddenly looked at Kason, who was sitting on the sofa playing with a quill. I'm fine. How long will he be confined for? 1 week. Plus after-school work, Snape said calmly. Okay, let's start from tomorrow. Kason nodded. Soon after sending the last person out of the office, Kason did not lock the door and go back to bed. Instead, he visited the library late at night. Because of Snape's extra points, it can be said that the scores of the 4 major colleges are a bit inflationary, so 20 points, to be honest, it is hard to tell whether it is serious or not. Poor Professor Kason had no choice but to go to the library in the middle of the night to look up information to see what kind of method Draco's confinement would be used for tomorrow, such as harsh or not. An hour later, Kason returned to the office and put down a cubic meter of red stone in the corner and took out a small file. He had already thought that Draco would not go back tomorrow unless he carefully kneaded the entire red stone into red stone powder. The next day, evening. Professor Kason, are you kidding? Draco held a small file in his hand that was not much thicker than his finger, looked at the red stone in front of him that seemed heavier than him, and looked at Kay in confusion. Senior, yes, Mr. Malfoy. Why else would you come to confinement? You must know that confinement cannot be comfortable. Draco knelt down resignedly and started rubbing the file. Professor, is this the red stone? Do you still know about Hongshire? You are only in the 1st grade. This thing is very famous in the castle, and those 5th graders show it off everywhere. Draco complained. Professor, do you usually use this red stone to make alchemy creations? And its powder can be used as a magic circuit, in 2 different ways than the magic pattern circuit. What's the difference? Kason knocked on the table. You are here for confinement, not for class. Okay. Draco lowered his head. After a minute or two, Kason's voice came over again. Normally speaking, the magic contained in the magic pattern circuit will become magic after the magic pattern runs. But this can be done by using the enchanting table. You should know the enchanting table. Yeah, I know. The redstone circuit is the benchmark of the magic circuit, like a switch, used to activate the magic pattern circuit. Draco nodded. Then what is the difference between this thing and the magic circuit? Faster, stronger, and tougher. Keep grinding. Kesen was sitting on his seat reading a book, and he did not forget to say, "Please hurry up, Mr. Malfoy, your confinement is based on red stones. If you only grind this one redstone in 7 days, do you know what this means?" Draco didn't know why, but suddenly felt a chill on his back. "This means you still have 6 red stone blocks of the same size to grind," Kesen said without waiting for Draco to answer. "Oh my god. Professor, you can't be so cruel, right? You won't be so cruel, right?" Draco's movements of filing the red stone with the file became faster involuntarily. Chapter 48. The texture of red stone is soft, and the sound of grinding it with a file is not that harsh. When the door is closed, it can barely be used as white noise for sleeping at night. In this way, until the middle of the night, Kesen sat up from the bed because of thirst. He picked up a glass of water and drank it in one gulp. After thinking about it, he walked out of the bedroom. Draco was sitting on his knees in the corner of the office, holding a file in his hand and leaning against the wall, already asleep. Upon seeing this, he returned to the bedroom, took out a blanket, and carefully covered Draco, but still had no intention of preparing a bed for him and letting him go back to the dormitory. People should pay some price for what they do. Draco doesn't know how hurtful a vicious word can be, so as a professor, Kesen kindly helped Draco understand that he did this how heavy the price is. Just like that the next day, Draco felt the sunlight shining on his face and opened his eyes in confusion. He expressed deep respect for the nightmare last night. There was no blood, no darkness, no protruding faces, just a huge red stone and a file to make him feel the deep fear. "Fortunately, I woke up from the dream." He subconsciously wanted to stretch, and then he felt his body stiffen for a while. He lowered his head and saw that the red stone had been worn by him for half a night, and only 2/3 of it was left. There is still the small file in his hand. He stood up, the blanket he was wearing fell to the ground, and he kicked the red stone in front of him a little, but unfortunately, although the red stone was soft, it was still compared to stone. Compared to Draco's feet. He subconsciously stepped back, and just in time one foot stepped on the blanket and the other foot was caught by the blanket. The forces in the two directions interacted, and then he leaned forward straight from behind. "The back of my head hit the ground hard, but fortunately there was a thick wool carpet." The combination of a series of unlucky things and the grievances of grinding the red stone all night yesterday made Draco burst into tears. Kesen, who was holding a stack of refreshing potions, stopped outside the office door. He put his ear against the door and listened. When the noise inside became quieter, he opened the door and walked in. "Drink this bottle of refreshing potion. Otherwise, you will probably catch a cold here all night." Kesen placed the refreshing potion on the coffee table, along with a sandwich and a bottle of pumpkin juice. "By the way, there's also breakfast." Draco, who had been grinding the red stone all night, was already hungry. He picked up the sandwich and took a bite. When he tried to swallow it, he found that his throat hurt. He has caught a cold. It depends on your progress. It will take about 21 days to get out of confinement. Kesen looked at the wear and tear of the red stone, touched his chin and sat on the sofa, opposite Draco. He looked at the little wizard in front of him with fearful and resentful eyes, shrugged his shoulders, and had no other thoughts. It was just like a prisoner hating his jailer. It was human nature. However, explanation still needs to be explained. "Did you regret it later?" "What?" Draco, who was eating in pain, raised his head and asked, "Do you regret using such foul language to insult Miss Granger?" Draco didn't answer, but continued eating with his head down. "Do you know what mudblood means?" Draco shook his head. "That's right. Your father and mother might say such words occasionally, but they would never teach them to you. In short, this word is very dirty. It is definitely not an ordinary derogatory term for muggle-born wizards. You can use any word you can imagine, including but not limited to genitals, animals, personal insults, humiliation, curses. None of them combined are as vicious as the original meaning of this word." "I know." Draco lowered his head and said dryly. Kesen didn't know whether he knew it or not. "Remember to drink this bottle of refreshing potion after you finish eating. I have prepared 14 bottles of refreshing potion for you, but considering your efficiency, I need to go to Madame Pomfrey to get 7 more bottles. That is to say, you will have to endure this kind of life for another 20 days. Hearing Kesen's cold words, Draco's tears, which he had held back with great difficulty, burst out again. The originally sweet sandwich turned salty in less than 5 seconds. I hope you can remember this lesson, Mr. Malfoy. After dinner and taking medicine, you can wash up here, or go back to your dormitory, wash up, and then go back to the classroom for class. After class in the afternoon, finish it. After you have finished the work that Professor McGonagall has assigned you, return here and continue grinding until you have finished grinding all 7 red stones. Draco listened with trembling eyes and raised his head with a bit of grievance. Can I take a leave and stay here all the time? If this happens, other young wizards will learn more spells than you, and you don't want to be beaten without any chance to fight back in the next wizard duel or fight. Kaysen did not refuse, but just said the benefits. Speak clearly. I'll be back after class. Of course, if you don't come, I will have to go to Severus myself to ask for the person. After Draco left the office, Kaysen waved his hand and collected all the redstone powder scattered in the corner, which could be used directly as teaching materials for the 5th grade. Soon, the first-year morning classes were almost over, and Draco returned to the alchemy office dejectedly and picked up the small file to sharpen it. Kaysen just sat on the sofa, ignoring everything, and made a pot of green tea. When it was time for the afternoon class, Draco would leave in shame again. In this way, in just half a day, another 1/3 of the red stone was erased. Kaysen was quite satisfied with this. After all, if he continued to maintain this efficiency and speed, he might not need to go to Madame Pomfrey to get another stack of stimulant potions. Of course, redstone is secondary. He still sincerely hopes that this little wizard who speaks without thinking can learn a good lesson from this time. After all, he is only 11 years old, and the little lousy has not yet been fixed as the father, so everything is still in time. In this way, the naive Professor Kaysen thought that everything was moving in the right direction. Especially one day, a week and a half later, Draco had only 1 red stone left. If the 4 little Gryffindors hadn't come, he would have almost believed it. Real. Chapter 49. Wait a minute. Tell it to me again. Kaysen took a deep breath and said slowly, Draco was in the office first, grinding the red stone honestly, right? Draco, who was standing in the corner dropping the pearl, and the 4 little Gryffindors beside him nodded at the same time. Then, the 4 of you came to see me. It happened that my office door was unlocked, and Draco happened to say come in. So you came in? The 5 little wizards nodded again. Then, after you guys came in, Draco was still an honest grinder. Ron, you were sitting there drinking Coke. Wasn't the Coke you found there? Forget it, this is not the time to worry about this. In short, Draco didn't mess with you, and then Ron sat on the sofa and drank Coke and got high. Finally, Draco got angry, and you guys took out your wands and started fighting. The 5 people still nodded. Kaysen also nodded understandingly. I almost understand. In this case, why don't you go out and fight? Just like you said, my office door is not locked. After you finish fighting, aren't you afraid that you won't be able to get in? I'm afraid of being discovered by the professor and Filch when I go out to fight. Harry whispered. Harry, let me ask you, who am I? Kaysen sat on the only surviving sofa in the corner, pressed his thumb on the middle of the body, and said without any strength or means, Are you Kaysen? Or Professor Alchemy? Harry said the first answer without thinking at all, and then he realized, Professor Kaysen in front of him. The last 2 words are professor. That's right. I am also a professor. I understand your fear of professors very well, so you don't dare to cause harm under the professor's nose. But can you remember that I am also a professor? Who can tell me why? Why are you doing this to my office? And my red stone flash, which I hand-carved little by little. Kaysen knocked on the coffee table in front of him again, and there was a flash cut into 2 pieces lying there on it. Let me ask you, children, why are you afraid of other professors but not me? Gryffindors never speak without thinking. For example, Ron said out of nowhere, because you are a good person? Absurd. Should a good person's office be turned upside down by you stirring it up with your wand? There is a saying that this was the first time Kaysen broke through the defense as a professor, and it was not because of the office. Speaking of which, the office had been bombed more than once, and he would redecorate it with a new decoration style every time. But only this time. Hey. Kaysen gently tapped the 2 sections of flash on the coffee table with his knuckles, instantly turning them into powder. Okay, 5 powerful little wizards. I can only say that I am going to start decorating my new office, so I have to hand you over to Professor McGonagall. And Draco, you're lucky. Although this time it's not your fault, but 1 yard for the other, your piece of red stone is still recorded. Now you choose to wait until I renovate the office and you come back to continue grinding. Or should we go to Professor McGonagall and let Professor McGonagall's punishment offset the red stone? Kaizen asked. Professor McGonagall, Draco said decisively. Okay, follow me now. The 5 little wizards followed Kaizen dejectedly to Professor McGonagall's office. There, 5 little wizards witnessed the transformation of a respected professor into a lioness. After the complaint was over, Kaizen also believed that Professor McGonagall would give him justice, so he left Professor McGonagall's office with sincerity and sneaked into the principal while Dumbledore was going to the kitchen to turn on the stove. Room. Then he discovered that the wine that was supposed to belong to Professor Kaizen had Dumbledore's name written on it. How can this be allowed? He decisively put the wine in his arms and walked towards Hagrid's cabin. Then he witnessed the third dramatic thing today. The dragon hatched by Hagrid was almost the size of a table and was currently studying how to swallow the magma block at the base of the fireplace into its belly. This little guy, big guy, is Lue so big? Hagrid raised his eyebrows. Her name is not Lue. Lue is the 3-headed dog. Oh, yeah. Tooth is the hound chewing the bone. Okay, maybe my memory is not very good. How do you plan to arrange him? It seems that she will start to measure your size in a few days. Don't say that. She is a good child. Oh, but she is indeed too big. You are right. Ron and Malfoy gave me 2 business cards before. They are from Dragon Farm. I checked the information at some time and wanted to see which one of these 2 has better conditions. Hagrid took out a thick pile of information. Really, Kaizen had never seen so much paper within a 5-meter radius of Hagrid. You choose whatever you want, and now I don't want to hear the names of those 2 little bastards. My figurine was destroyed by them. As he spoke, he took out the wine from his arms. Wow, isn't this the wine Dumbledore brought back from his last trip to France? This is good stuff, Hagrid said with some surprise. What Dumbledores? Now they are the collection of Kesensis. From 20 minutes ago to the future, they will be my collection. You went to Dumbledore's office? Hagrid asked, stroking his beard. Kaizen looked at Hagrid strangely, but still comforted him. Don't worry, if you don't tell me and I don't tell, who will know? Besides, he has no evidence. But I remember that Dumbledore cherished these 2 bottles of wine very much. It is said that he would tell bedtime stories to these 2 bottles of wine. Hagrid swallowed. Kaizen opened the wine happily and took 2 wine glasses. Hagrid took the wine glasses heartily. What a drink. Yeah, but Dumbledore? Don't worry about Dumbledore. There are so many people who know his office password, and he doesn't know that I got it. Kaizen waved his hand and took another sip of wine. Hagrid took a deep breath and took a sip of wine. Late at night, Kaizen, who was already dizzy, pushed open the door of Hagrid's hut. The cold winter wind mixed with snowflakes did not make him sober. On the contrary, it had the urge to make him fall headlong into the snow. Oh, by the way, the 2 gatekeeper statues in Principal Dumbledore's office are self-aware. Did you know that? Kaizen was mostly awake in an instant, and the smell of alcohol making his whole body seem to be emitting steam. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Hagrid mixed his 2 thick fingers together. He couldn't say that he had been craving Dumbledore's 2 bottles of wine for a long time, right? Chapter 50. Grrr. Kaizen went to the Hog's Head Tavern and asked the bearded old man at the bar to pour some whiskey into it. As for what kind of whiskey it was, don't ask, it's good wine if it doesn't give Dumbledore diarrhea. This time, he did not choose to use the password to enter the principal's office directly, but teleported directly to the windowsill outside the principal's room. He grabbed the windowsill with both hands and pushed himself up. This step was to see whether Dumbledore was in the principal's office. Otherwise, it would be very embarrassing if he teleported to the principal's office and found Dumbledore sitting there. But fortunately, when he looked in from the window, no one was there. Great. Kaizen exerted his strength, opened the office window from the outside, and rolled in blankly. He took out the 2 bottles of wine pinned to his waist and placed them firmly on the desk. He only needed a ruler to measure them. As for whether there is anything wrong with the wine, will it be discovered? Anyway, Hagrid talked about wine and Dumbledore was reluctant to drink it, so he probably wouldn't. He straightened up and stretched, and just as he was about to teleport away, he saw half a person in a cabinet in the corner of Dumbledore's office. There is a person's lower body. In other words, Dumbledore put his upper body into the cabinet. The man in the cabinet discovered Kaizen after he opened the window and immediately muttered in the cabinet. So energetic? Is he a little wizard? Come here and help me. I'm stuck in the cabinet. Got it. Kaysen breathed a sigh of relief when he heard what Dumbledore said. It was fine that he didn't know who he was, and he had no intention of helping Dumbledore out of trouble. You must know that the principal has great magic power, and this cabinet is not a treasure chest monster. If he wants to come up with it, he only needs to know his thoughts, not even a wand. At this moment, the most important thing is to run away quickly, but it's a pity that I can't teleport with the Ender. Kaysen quickly climbed up the windowsill and knelt down half kneeling on it. A water source cube appeared in his hand, showing a small splash of water on the ground of Hogwarts. Then Dumbledore suddenly muttered in the cupboard. Don't leave in a hurry, Kaysen. Is there anyone else in Hogwarts besides you who would come to the principal's office and steal the poor principal's collection? Kaysen, who was doing some mental construction for himself, suddenly changed his face. Ah, isn't this the principal? Why are you stuck in the cabinet? As he spoke, he quickly jumped down from the windowsill, hugged Dumbledore with the same vigor as Lugician pulling out a weeping willow, and pulled Dumbledore out desperately. It seems that Dumbledore is going to cosplay 2.5 Shangyang directly in this poor cabinet, as if no one will know that he stole the wine. Of course, in fact, while pulling out, Kaysen controlled each small block to carefully separate the cabinet from the place where Dumbledore was stuck. After all, Dumbledore was over 100 years old, so he couldn't really let others pull him to death. Soon, as if two plastic stools were pulled out together, there seemed to be a bang in the void, and Dumbledore saw the light of day. Thank you, Kaysen. Kaysen sat in his chair glumly. Speaking of which, I'm still curious. How did you know it was me who came here and not that naughty little wizard riding a broomstick? First, the two guys at the door told me that you came here before and took away 2 bottles of wine from me. Secondly, Kaysen, you have underestimated your courage. Although the little wizards can be called bold, sneaking into the principal's office is still too much for them. Okay. That's good. Now that you're out of trouble, I should leave too. So, Professor McGonagall urged me to give you lesson plans, you know? After listening to the explanation, Kaysen said with a smile. He stood up from the chair in an extremely slow manner and moved slowly towards the door of the principal's office. It was as if Dumbledore was a frog. He could only see moving objects but not stationary objects. Kaysen, do I seem to you to be an old fool? Dumbledore sat on his seat and hugged his shoulders, watching Kaysen's performance quietly, and then fainted when he was about to walk out the door. Said, "Oh, okay. Is there anything I can do?" Kaysen said in one breath, turning around and sitting on the chair opposite Dumbledore. "Thank you for not choosing to teleport away directly." "Oh, am I still in time?" "Sorry, it's too late." "Okay. What's the matter?" Dumbledore reluctantly picked up the 2 bottles of wine on his desk and walked towards the cabinet in the corner. The accumulation of time will make wine mellow. You can also stock up on a few bottles of wine. After a few days, ordinary wine will turn into good wine. Kaysen nodded. "I will. By the way, where did you get these 2 bottles of wine from?" "Pig's Head Bar." Dumbledore paused as he put the wine in the cabinet, then changed direction and threw the 2 bottles of wine into the trash can. "Is there anything wrong with the wine there? I was quite happy drinking before." Kaysen's mouth twitched. "It's nothing. Just keep drinking happily. You should have something you need me to do, right?" "No, of course not. How could I leave something to you to do? In your eyes, am I just the kind of person who can't afford early benefits and needs to be rewarded for any efforts he makes?" Dumbledore shrugged. Shoulders said, "Then why are you stopping me and not letting me go?" "Because your action of treating me like a frog was so funny that I couldn't help it." "Okay, Kaysen, you can go now." Kaysen curled his lips, stood up, and was about to leave. "Oh, by the way, Kaysen, is Hagrid drunk too much?" Dumbledore asked. "Yes, what's wrong?" "And you?" "I was scared by you and smelled of alcohol, but at least I'm still sober." Kaysen turned around and spread his hands. "In this case, as Hagrid's loyal drinking buddy, perhaps you need to take over from Hagrid to complete his work tonight," Dumbledore said. "Inspection of the Forbidden Forest?"
Yes.
"At 10 o'clock tonight. You still have 2 hours to repair yourself," Dumbledore said as he glanced at a small clock placed in the corner of the table. Kaysen nodded and left the principal's office without incident. After drinking 2 bottles of wine and patrolling the Forbidden Forest for a night, it was fair.
Thanks for watching. You can find the next videos in the playlist linked in the info card, directly on my channel, or right here on the screen. And as always, if you have any feedback, feel free to share it in the comments too.